Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel, and you're watching TechStrong TV. Today's Tuesday, June 30th. Wow, another month down. I just can't believe it's the end of June already. This is episode 59 of TechStrong TV, so we are averaging right around 20 episodes a month, which kind of makes sense then when you think about it. There are about 20 working days in a month. Anyway, what can we say? I hope everyone is safe and well. I know for many of you watching this, no matter where you are in the world, COVID and the coronavirus seems to not, just as a tough foe. It's going to take all of us, wearing masks, social distancing, doing what we need to do as a race, as humanity, as a species, to flatten the curve and beat this foe. I've seen encouraging news on the vaccine fronts, and though they may not be 100% effective, that will certainly help. But until then, all I could say is stay safe and do what you need to do to keep you and your family safe. But at the same time, we all have work to do, and tech stops for no one. It is TechStrong after all. And we have a lot of news and events and happening in tech as we continue to keep the lights on here. So let's get started with today's show. We have a pretty decent show lined up for you today. I got some really great interviews myself that I want to bring to your attention. Our first interview today is with the Dmitry Sakhanov from 42 Crunch. I met Dmitry and the 42 Crunch team about a year ago at RSA conference, APJ, RSAC APJ. They had a booth there. They were exhibiting, and we were doing video from RSA APJ. And I had a chance to meet with them. Stayed in touch with the company and Dmitry in particular, since Dmitry's in Southern California now. And they really have kind of pioneered a lot of API security, DevSecOps functionality. The company continues to do pretty well. I had a chance in this interview to catch up with Dmitry. You'll hear all about it. After that, we have Michael Wright, who is from the CloudBees federal team. CloudBees recently announced that they had won a Department of Defense DoD approval for their hardened version of CloudBees that came, and this was via an Air Force certification. So this is something I have a little bit of experience with from my days at Still Secure. I think there's a lot that goes into getting a DoD certification. Michael Wright of CloudBees will tell you more about it, and we'll discuss that a bit. Then I have a new guest for you, charming fellow, Julian Waits. Julian is the GM of the Cyber Business Unit at Devotech, and they also recently got some federal DoD-related contracts and certifications. But more importantly, cybersecurity is becoming an increased focus for what Devo does around logs and analysis and stuff like that. And Julian's going to tell us all about it. And then speaking of RSA APJ, I am really pleased to be joined by two of my really good friends, Linda Gray Martin and Brita Glade. For those who don't know, Linda is, I believe, general manager for RSA conference. Brita runs a whole bunch of it, programming and everything else. RSA casts a very big footprint and a big shadow across our industry. And sometimes it's easy to forget that the organization itself is tiny. There's only a handful of full-time RSA conference employees, and for anyone who talks about diversity and so forth, the fact is most of them are women, and they do an amazing job running RSA conference year in, year out, across the country, across the globe. Now this year, of course, had a lot of challenges. In just a couple of weeks, RSA conference APJ will be up on. It's going to be, of course, virtual this year, and it's free to everyone, and they have an amazing lineup we are actually participating, along with my friend Mark Miller from All Day DevOps and Sonatype. We'll be putting on a 3/4 day event for DevSecOps as part of RSA APJ. Anyway, I speak with Linda and Brita, and you'll be able to check that out right there. So after our discussion with Linda Gray Martin and Brita Glade from RSAC, we are going to go into the archives for something old from earlier this month, TechStrong Con. Really happy to bring to you Jessica Dean, and her presentation was titled DevOps Waffles and Superheroes. It's actually a great deep dive, and it's technical. Let me warn you up front, this is not some fluff piece. About microservices, containers, best practices, and how DevOps can help with it all. Jessica's brilliant. I really, really encourage you to watch that presentation. Then after Jessica, we're going to have the news or usual roundup. Then we'll head over to Charlene O'Hanlon, who has Ben Hinderman, CTO and co-founder at D2IQ, as well as webinar previews for webinars this week. And then Mitchell, over on the Analyst Corner, has a good discussion about the privacy improvements Apple announced at the Apple Developers Conference. I guess it was last week. And some of the other goings on there, so don't miss that one. And then I'll be back to wrap things up. It's about 2.5 hours worth of great content today. We're going to take a commercial right now. We'll be right back with our first interview.
Devops.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. Devops.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. Devops.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. Devops.com, where the world meets DevOps.
So I first met Dmitry Sotnikov and became familiar with 42 Crunch at the RSA APJ conference last year in Singapore. After sitting and talking to Dmitry and the team, I realized how important API security was going to be. With more and more of our applications using API gateways, mesh, it seemed like such a natural point, first of all, for a Nexus as a good place to have security, but also, quite frankly, as a place where security was going to be really needed, because malicious activity at the API gateway, if you will, or at the API Nexus had such potential for chaos. I've stayed in contact with Dmitry since then and the 42 Crunch team. They've made tremendous progress. And I was really happy to catch up with him for this interview here on TechStrong TV. And now let's go to my interview with 42 Crunch.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this segment for TechStrong TV. I'm actually joined by someone I had the pleasure of meeting at RSA Conference APJ, back when we used to go to conferences in person. Actually, it was probably it was about a year ago now, last early July, if I'm not mistaken. It's Dmitry Sotnikov. Dmitry, did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, you did it perfect.
Perfect. Dimitri's the Chief Product Officer at a company called 42 Crunch, right? We got it. So I met 42 Crunch. You were exhibiting at the RSA APJ event last year. I had a chance to meet you, your CEO, some more of the team. We did a video there. And you guys were kind of just rolling out at that point. Had some really great ideas around DevSecOps and DevOps and so forth. And I said, hey, man, stay in touch with me. And we've exchanged some emails over the time, but we haven't really had a chance to catch up. So first of all, thank you for joining us. In case anyone is interested, Dimitri is not joining me from Singapore, so we didn't get him up in the middle of the night for this. He's actually out on the West Coast in California. So, Dimitri, why don't we start with, it's been a year. People may not know about 42 Crunch. Tell them a little bit about the company, what you guys do, and then we'll go over with what's new and what's happening.
Yeah, sounds good. And thanks for having me, Alan. So 42 Crunch, we are an API security company, REST API security. We provide a platform that helps our customers discover the REST APIs that they have, and then do security testing, both static and dynamic, and then runtime protection. So it's an end-to-end solution for everything REST API.
Excellent. And of course, the API security space has gotten very busy in the last 6, 8 months, 9 months. A lot of it around Kubernetes and mesh APIs and stuff like this. All of a sudden people are realizing now that, the APIs are the heart of the traffic negotiation, if you will, right? The nerve center of how communication's going back and forth. And, first of all, discovering, as you mentioned, discovering what APIs you have, right? Because until you know what you have, you can't really secure it. So understanding what you have and then securing them is a big job and an important job. So how much of the business, Dimitri, at this point is based on Kubernetes type infrastructures, if you know? Is it a lot or up and coming?
It is a lot, and it's funny that you mentioned like 6 to 8 months. That the world is changing very, very rapidly. When we were starting the company a little over 3 years ago, the world was a much different place, and not just the lack of pandemics, but also just the whole API thing. I mean, companies, I remember the times when companies used to have like 3, 5 APIs, like they would have some sort of API management solution with a developer portal that would document those like 5 APIs and the whole lifecycle process of people reviewing those APIs and having some sort of a manual process around that and so on. So the world radically changed, and thanks to the whole cloud native architectures and Kubernetes, like you mentioned, we are now in the world of companies having thousands and thousands of APIs, because what used to be in the old days, developers would architect their application and they would decompose the architecture in some sort of classes and objects, and they will, all these components would talk to each other, but within the same box, computer or virtual machine or something. Now it's all microservices or serverless functions. So anytime a developer does some sort of a new component, chances are that this component has an API and talks to other components over network. So that Kubernetes and then serverless technologies that happened very quickly. Obviously, they appeared a few years ago, but really gained adoption and traction within the last year. They led to the massive proliferation of APIs. And I think a lot of companies are still catching up and figuring out how that changes their security model, their edge, their attack surface, and their processes.
Well, unfortunately, or maybe it's fortunately, I think it's unfortunately, that seems to always be the model, right? These new technologies come on board. Companies say, wow, I could do so much with this. This enables us to go faster, be better, right? Hire this, better that. And then all of a sudden they say, wait a second, what about security on this, right? Right? What does this mean from security? Do I have a wider attack surface? Is there what I'm doing before, does it make sense under, with this new model? And the good news is it's an opportunity for companies like 42 Crunch to come in and say, hey, this is a different problem than you've dealt with before, right? You might be familiar with static and dynamic vulnerabilities testing, right, as part of your AppSec, but you're not doing that on your APIs. And so it's given rise to this whole API security type of market of which you guys are, as you said, you've been in 3 years already. So Dimitri, since we've spoken last year, what's been going on with the company?
Obviously a lot changes in 1 year, right? So the main changes that happened to us was us expanding more from the purely enterprise model and enterprise customers down lower the stack and low in the markets, and starting to offer self-service plans and sort of medium and small business tiers, and even a freemium model. A year ago, we were still selling mostly. We had high touch enterprise sale. We were really selling mostly to large enterprises, and then we re-architected our platform. We rolled out new version of the platform that is totally SaaS and multi-tenant, and now we have the capability to also let small and medium size teams and companies to buy from us, or even just try it for free. So they can literally go to 42crunch.com, sign up for a free account, and start using it, and whatever, for a small number of APIs, even use it for free. So that's a huge.
That's a big model shift.
It's a big model shift for us, both on the.
It's funny. Usually, you'll see companies come into market, and first they'll offer the solution to SMB or mid-enterprise because they think those customers are less demanding. They maybe will make do with a solution that's not as mature, and also doesn't have to be as scalable because it's not as big. And then over time, they build that solution to go up market to large enterprise. You guys have started with a large enterprise and have now brought it down to mid-market. And you know what they say about the Fortune 500, Dimitri? The problem with the Fortune 500, there's only 500 of them, and so you can only sell to 500. Where in the mid-market, there's hundreds of thousands of, if not millions, of companies that this may very well be a solution for. But you're right. To do it at that volume is a different model in that it does have to be self-serve, right? To a large extent. It does, you can't afford, let's call it the white glove service that you would get, in a large enterprise account that's paying a lot of money for that kind of service. But nevertheless, it's the SaaS model of today, right? Think about all the applications people use, and that's how they do it. You mentioned the free version, though. What's in the free version?
So and just to be clear, I mean, we obviously still we still have the enterprise tier, we still have account managers, etc. So we're still serving that high-end market just fine. So nothing changes there. For the small and medium size companies and teams, obviously it is more automated, like you mentioned. It's self-service. People can use their credit cards to pay and just sign up for the free account and so on. So within the free service, they still have our testing. They still have the protection. It's just limited to the number of APIs. So they can use the free service up to 3 APIs. So that can work for a startup or an individual project team that's relatively small scale. And they can still use the protection, again, with their Kubernetes deployments, with their microservices to protect them on runtime, up to a certain amount of traffic, and obviously with support that is not as individual and not ticket-based, etc. But even if they go beyond that, even if they have, say, 10 APIs and more traffic, etc., there are still tiers at which they can pay just hundreds of dollars a month and not tens of thousands, right? So we do give that ability to pay slightly more as you grow and not immediately go to that high-end tier.
That's excellent. So Dimitri, I got to ask, because it's on everybody's mind, I guess, with the COVID and not traveling and so forth. How's it affected your business, if at all? How is, I don't know, were you all remote before this? And then, in terms of customers, what kind of effect have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, for us, being a technology company and actually a company in the security space, the day-to-day work did not change much. I mean, all of our employees obviously work using their laptops, and we already have two-factor authentication everywhere, and so on and so forth. And we also have been distributed from the get-go. So we have an office here in California. We have then our main development centers are in Europe, one in Dublin, Ireland, and the other one in Montpellier in France. So we are sort of used to having whatever Zooms and Google Meets, etc., for our day-to-day coordination and using cloud services again to track tickets and roadmaps and have uses our code repositories and so on and so forth. So so nothing really changed. I mean, apart from obviously now everyone being remote and not just working with other offices. And with regards to the demand and the market, we have actually not noticed much of a change. I mean, there were some projects with some customers and some prospects that got delayed, especially during the first, say, month of the pandemic, when a lot of companies were not sure of the impact and their budgets and so on. But I feel that by now we're not seeing much of an impact anymore. And API security is such a hot space. I think companies just understand that this is something that they have to do, that they have to start looking into that. And if anything, the whole COVID situation is leading companies to accelerate their digital transformation and accelerate adoption of cloud technologies and the APIs for their own customers and for their own products, so that generates more demand rather than less demand.
We've seen this. Obviously, we've been doing TechStrong TV now for almost, I guess, more than 3 months. And what we're seeing is companies who facilitate cloud transformation, moving to, a Kubernetes, a new stack, if you will, and helping them, enabling remote, self-serve, and security in general, right? Security's become so much more, not that it wasn't before, but it's become much, much, much more important. Those companies are, they're leaning into this. They're growing through this, where, other kinds of technologies that aren't kind of cloud focused or, stuff like that, they're having a harder time, quite frankly. And I don't know if that'll ever come back. I think more and more companies are saying we wanted to move to the cloud before, we thought about it, but now they have to. And that's always the difference to me in successful businesses, Dimitri. If you've got something that's a must-have, you're good. If it's a nice-to-have, in tough times, nice-to-haves don't make it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's kind of where we are. So what else is new? So you've given us a picture. Anything else new at 42 Crunch?
Yeah, I mean, the other big change is our much greater interest, much greater focus on the ecosystem. So again, traditionally, a lot of vendors, if you look at those web application firewalls and the API management solutions, etc., they sort of approached the security space, the app security space, as a kind of standalone runtime protection solution. They would just whatever ship you the box and say, well, you put that box in front of your systems and then you configure it with your policies, etc., etc. We figured out that with APIs, it's very different. API security has to be very specific to the way that APIs are designed and developed and tested. I mean, just yesterday, Starbucks had the APIs hacked, right? And obviously, it was everywhere in the news yesterday and today. And yeah, they do have a web application firewall, but their web application firewall had some basic protection rules, not specific to that API. And so attacker found a way to just circumvent those rules. So it's very hard to just put something magical in front of your whole systems and have your APIs now automatically become secure. And so since our approach does not just the runtime protection, but also the API discovery and testing and helping developers design them, developers are different, right? So developers can be very attached to the systems that they're using today, to their developer environment, to their DevOps pipeline. They have the whole systems and tools that they're using, and those are the tools that keep them effective and help them provide the business value. And so we figured out that if we want developers to actually use our security solutions, we have to be there. We have to deliver that security technology not as some sort of standalone separate web UI to which they have to go and do security. Security has to be part of their day-to-day work. It has to be where when a developer is working on an API design in their IDE, in their developer tool, there should be a way not just to catch functional issues like they do with the regular IDEs, but to catch security issues right as they work on them. And then when they push their change to their repository, again, your security checks should be an automated part of that automated story of accepting your pull request. And then as you get into the DevOps pipeline, again, part of your security tests, your tests should not just be functional tests. It shouldn't be just DevOps. It should be DevSecOps, with security just being part of that pipeline. And so once we realized that, we started paying a lot more attention to the ecosystem. We've released plugins for Visual Studio, for Microsoft Visual Studio Code. That plugin is hugely successful. We released it less than a year ago. It now has more than 70,000 active installs. So not just downloads, but people actually actively using it on their laptops and desktops. And 70,000 is a big number, which makes us very happy.
I'm sure it would.
It's a testament that people do APIs, as we all know, but people actually care about security. So that's great. And then same thing with again, we're working on other IDEs like IntelliJ and Eclipse. Those plugins are coming very soon, within weeks from now. We have plugins for the popular CI/CD systems like Azure DevOps, Jenkins, Bamboo, Bitbucket, and so on and so forth. So basically, we used to just treat the world as the world using our platform. We do have our platform, but we also have pieces of it, integrated pieces of it, available in all those ecosystems.
Got it. Good stuff, Dmitry. Good stuff. I'm glad to see things are moving well there. And it sounds, look, you're right in the middle of where a lot of action's going on. So I'm sure it's going to continue. Don't wait a year to come back and update us, though, next time, right?
Yeah, sounds good. With less travel, it's much easier.
Yeah, it is. This is also true. All right, my friend. Dmitry Sotnikov of 42 Crunch, RESTful API Security, here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel, and we'll be right back with our next guest.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. Prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
For our next interview, we are interviewing Michael Wright, who's with the CloudBeast federal team. You know, I had a lot of experience doing federal information security, information assurance, as they called it, in my days at Still Secure. The CloudBeast team has recently been awarded a certificate for a hardened version of CloudBeast that was approved by an Air Force program and is good for DoD wide. Michael tells us about it and a little bit about what goes into getting these kinds of certifications and hardening done. If you are in the federal space, you may be familiar with it already, but if not, it's quite a bit of work. It's probably a year plus worth of work on this. So let's now go to Michael Wright from the federal team at CloudBeast, and we'll see what he has to say.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this segment of TechStrong TV. I'm joined right now by Michael Wright of the CloudBeast federal team with some recent news around I guess you call it a certification, but some approvals that CloudBeast has gotten in regard to certificates in regard to the federal government space, which for those who are not familiar, the federal government market is kind of a world unto itself in some ways. But anyway, Michael, welcome to TechStrong TV. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Alan. Very excited to be here.
Yes. Just a little backstory for our audience. Unfortunately, we recorded this with Michael, and Zoom problems, they happen. 99 out of 100 times it works right. Michael was number 99. So we're re-recording this. The news story, Michael, I think it was maybe about a week and a half ago the story came out, didn't it? Maybe 2 weeks even.
Yeah, right about 2 weeks ago. Two weeks to today. Yep.
But that's okay. I mean, and I think we covered it in Devops.com as well. But let's, for those who maybe aren't yet familiar, before we dig into it, why don't we just kind of recap what the news was?
Yeah, sure, Alan. So we announced 2 weeks ago that we have been officially approved within the Department of Defense Centralized Artifact Repository as part of the Platform One team's product stack. And what this specifically means is that we have received what's referred to as certificate to field for our hardened CloudBeast CI containers, which are an integral part of the Platform One product stack. So this makes it easy for DoD programs that are looking to implement CloudBeast CI as part of the product stack into their program environments and receive an authority to operate.
Fantastic. So I've got a couple of things that I want to just expand on, but why don't we start with what does it mean when we say you have a hardened product that's been approved, in this case by Product One, which is out of the Air Force, or shepherded by the Air Force. What exactly are you referring to?
So what it means to be hardened is that our engineering teams and our security teams have validated that our product is secure. And what it means to be secure is that we have minimized vulnerabilities within the various software components that make up our product. And what it means to have minimal vulnerabilities or minimized vulnerabilities is that you don't use outdated third-party components that may have security vulnerabilities that a hacker could take advantage of. It's becoming more and more important within the DoD space, Department of Defense space, and then the federal government as a whole, to ensure that the platforms upon which application systems are being developed are secure, and that there's no vulnerable surface or attack surfaces that a hacker could take advantage of and inject malicious code, for example, into the software supply chain.
Absolutely. And of course, we've seen this. Well, I've personally been involved in previous companies who sold into the service, the DoD space, Army, Navy, and information assurance. And I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, beyond there's no known vulnerabilities within the code itself, especially when we look at applications today that are really almost a Frankenstein of so many components rather than just custom code. It's important. Number two, though, is the way it communicates with other elements within the stack, right? Can it handle encryption or encrypted data transfer and so forth? I mean, there's a whole stig, if you will, of what hardened really means for any given kind of solution. But you mentioned that really this allows now CloudBees to play within this whole, is it Force One?
Platform One.
Platform One, excuse me. This whole Platform One stack. And really what that, so it's not just, CloudBees hardened containers hanging out here, right? It's now, this whole Platform One gives mission folks in the DoD as well as the rest of the government the ability to pick an entire stack of technology solutions that they build, whether it's in an approved cloud environment or on-prem or a private cloud, what have you. And so that means that not only is the CloudBees itself hardened, but that it's certified also, if I'm not mistaken, to work with the other solutions within that stack in a secure manner.
Correct.
Right? So it's not just one piece, it's an entire building block of a technology stack that are all certified and all certified to work together in a hardened manner as well.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, there are other vendors' technologies across the life cycle, like security tools, Git-based tools that have received the same sort of certification. And to your point earlier, part of that certification, ensures things like you don't use, unapproved ports to communicate on between your product and other products within the stack. You're not using unsecure protocols as part of that communication with other products in the stack. And a lot of these controls that are requirements that we hardened against came from DISA STIG and NIST RMF guidelines. Yep. So that was something that we looked at. Our engineering teams and security teams looked at was those guidelines to ensure that we're abiding by the appropriate controls.
Absolutely. I want to just bring up another point for our audience, Michael. When you say you guys have built this and certified that it works like that, I know from when I was in this space, getting this sort of certification approval, it doesn't take a day or a week or a month, right? This is a task, right? This is truly a mission, right? And the thing about it is they don't take your word for it either, right? I know they used to have independent labs that would test stuff, and and I'm wondering, did CloudBees have to go through any third-party validation here on this?
Well, the third-party validation would be the Platform One team within the Air Force. Mm-hmm. Our engineering and security teams worked closely with the Platform One team to make sure that we were abiding by those controls that we described. So we use a lot of the same security scanning tools that look for the vulnerabilities that the Platform One team would use as part of their vetting out process as well. And it's not a simple undertaking, as you alluded to. It is something that's strategic for a company to get behind, to get their engineering and their security resources behind. We as a company felt that it was important from a strategy standpoint to do this, and hence we embarked on these hardening efforts. And it wasn't, just for the DoD business that we looked at this, or just for our federal business as a whole that we looked at it, but it was for our entire business, because there's a lot of interest outside of the DoD and the federal government, within fintech, within telecom, within manufacturing, around having hardened software development tools like this. So we believe that this is something that won't just be looked at by our DoD and federal customers, but will be looked at by our commercial customers as well, and embraced by them. If you've got a DoD grade product, right, which has got some of the most strict security requirements out there, a lot of non-DoD and federal companies in the commercial sector are going to be interested in that, and it's going to give them a level of assurance that we are providing a secure CI/CD solution for their software development and software factories.
Excellent. Just to give our audience, if you can, how long, like in terms of time, how long did this process take you guys to get through?
A little bit over a year to get through it.
I think that's pretty normal, right?
It is. I've been in past lives, I've been a part of hardening efforts before, and it is a long process. And I would say it's about an average of a year, because you've got to get the company aligned behind it, and that means different stakeholders within the company agreeing to the long-term strategy and viability of what you're trying to do. But as I said, we thought it was something very strategic and good for all of our customers, and hence we put the resources behind it to make it happen.
Excellent. The other thing, again, for people who may not be familiar with the federal space is, look, this is now, though it was the Air Force, Platform One's Air Force, it's a DoD-wide approval certification. So all of the various agencies and divisions within DoD can kind of ride on that, as well as some of the three-letter agencies in our government and other kind of ancillary things that may not be strictly under DoD, but are adjacent to that, and quite frankly, a lot of the civilian agencies within the federal government will look to these kinds of certifications. Correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as over the past year, as we've been going through the hardening efforts, just given the visibility around the Platform One team, and just, DevSecOps and software factories in general within the federal space, we started to garner a lot of interest from our non-DoD federal customers, our civilian-based agencies, and they've been following this very closely, and looking to benefit from it once it became available.
Excellent. Next thing I wanted, not next thing, but this isn't, yes, it's done with for the certification approval of the federal government, DoD, civilian, but the general commercial market, right? We always used to kind of market, we had military grade kind of solutions because we were certified by DoD. That military grade, that says something, whether it's NATO military or US or what have you, right? It says something in the commercial market that if you're looking for, real certified security or secure solutions, right? The fact that you've got this certification. So will this configuration of hardened, this hardened configuration be available in commercial markets as well, you think?
It will. Yes, this is something that is going to be in our regular released product. So this is this isn't a one-off that we did just for our DoD or our federal business, but this is something we did for our overall business. So what this demonstrates is that CloudBees is taking security very seriously. And it's not just for our DoD and federal business that we're taking this very seriously, but we're taking it very seriously for our commercial business as well. So this hardened product, these hardened containers, will be available just as readily to our commercial customers in fintech, telecom, so forth.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. So, Michael, of course, it's one thing to be approved and so forth. It's another thing to be used, right, for people to use it. Talk to us, like, what is the use case within the federal space, and not the use case. I mean, the use case is kind of the same thing in the commercial space. Why do people use CloudBees and Jenkins X and a lot of these kinds of solutions? But where is the federal government in adoption of these DevOps type of CI/CD solutions?
I would say that they're in the early stages of adoption in the context of implementing DevSecOps processes. The CI/CD tooling, other lifecycle tooling has been around for a number of years. But this concept of DevSecOps and creating software factories using hardened containers is relatively new. And we're starting to see a lot of traction within our DoD and federal business around developing software factories in the name of implementing more mature and secure DevSecOps processes.
Yep, I think so, and that kind of makes sense. Though, surprisingly, in my 6, 7, 8 years in the DevOps space, I've seen instances where the federal space kind of led the way. A lot of times in conjunction with some of the larger integrators with specific projects and so forth. But I've definitely seen instances where the Fed space, was out in front rather than playing kind of catch up, to what commercial providers or commercial companies are doing around CI/CD and DevOps.
Yeah, this is what you might classify as a somewhat rare example of the federal government leading. I mean, within the federal government as a whole, and particularly within the federal systems integrator community, who are the ones building the majority of these business information systems and weapon systems to serve the mission of government. A number of them are starting to incorporate these software factories into their overall practices, and the supply chain is being looked at more and more. The reason it's being looked at more and more is because of the potential for state actors with the resources, money, and time, to take advantage of insecure software supply chains. So this is something that we see as a long-term strategic thing, not just that the federal government needs to concentrate on, but any company out there needs to be concerned with. Particularly as more and more people become connected from a software development standpoint, and they're working remotely. So that the security of that supply chain really needs to be a number one priority for CIOs and CISOs across federal government and commercial.
Excellent stuff. Michael, we didn't mention the solution is now available. The story broke 2 weeks ago. What kind of government schedules is it, or contracts is this available on?
So we do have a GSA schedule that this can
CloudBees has their own GSA?
Yes, they do. Yeah, we've got a GSA schedule that's held by a partner of ours,
Okay.
DLT and Carasoft, and then we've got other various contract vehicles, GWACs, government-wide acquisition contracts, BPAs, blanket purchase agreements that the product can be purchased via as well.
Fantastic, man. Hey, Michael, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you coming back after our technical snafus there. Best of luck with this. It'll be interesting to see, the government pickup on this, right? Because I think our government will function better with more modern technology, certainly, and having it secured like this is a great thing. Congratulations. I know it's a lot of work shepherding these things through, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much, Alan. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Michael Wright from the CloudBees Federal team here on TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind Devops.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Our next interview is with Julian Waits. Julian is the GM of the cybersecurity unit at Devo Technologies. Devo also recently had some approvals from the DoD and a contract with the Air Force. But more than that, Devo is really not pivoting, but focusing in on the cybersecurity aspects and benefits of using Devo for security. They do a great job. They've been around, based in Madrid. They've been around, well, they were founded in Madrid. I think they may be based here now. But they still have offices all over, and they're really doing some excellent work in the cyberspace and logs, analytics, etc. So let's now go to my interview with Julian Waits, and he'll tell us more.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, thanks for joining us for this next session on TechStrong TV. I'm joined for this session by Julian Waits from Devo Technologies. Hey, Julian, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hey, Alan, I'm elated to be here with you today.
Hey, man. Well, that's a great way. Flattery will get you everywhere, man. So thanks very much for being happy. I hope we do right by you with it. Julian, we've covered Devo a little bit in the past, but it's probably been some time. So I'm going to ask, and certainly not since we had started TechStrong TV here. So I'm going to ask you, our audience is a little bit of our Devops.com audience, a little bit of our Security Boulevard, which is more cybersecurity, and then Container Journal, all the cloud native, Kubernetes, and all that kind of stuff. Give the audience a little flavor. What is Devo? Who is Devo Technologies? What do you guys do?
Yeah, so Devo Technologies is a data operations company and data analytics. We focus, to the point that you made before, on the DevOps side of it, or IT ops, AI ops, and also on the security operations side. We look at your operational data, whether it comes from your NOC or your SOC. We pull it all together to help you detect and remediate the things that matter most to your enterprise.
Absolutely. And, Devo's been around a while. You guys, I think, were originally founded in Madrid, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
And there's still a lot of R&D and stuff that goes on over there. Those sales, marketing, and other stuff is U.S. based now. Insight Partners portfolio company
That's correct.
And really, I mean, when you look at, so I always think of Devo is, when you see companies, and not to compare or anything, but sort of like a Splunk, where they're trying to gather all this information and then analysis and so forth. Devo has a fresh take on that kind of functionality and performance. Fair?
So, Alan, you're completely on target there. I mean, one of the reasons the company was funded was specifically to disrupt Splunk. Our belief and the way we look at our technology and work with our customers is the, IT operations, security operations space needs, new technology that's more modern to allow our customers to pull that data together as quickly as possible and as easily as possible. And so, our paradigm is, our infrastructure is much less than theirs, say in a normal type situation, call it 5 terabytes of data ingest a day or more. And typically our cost structure from a licensing perspective is also a lot less.
Absolutely. And Julian, we should mention, give us a little bit of the Julian Waite story.
Sure. So my role here at Devo is I'm the general manager of the cybersecurity business unit. Mm-hmm. I've been in the cyber market now, my God, too long to admit.
You and me both.
But basically since its inception, Alan. And when I was first hired in 2 years ago, the CEO and our founder recruited me. It was basically to help create a go-to-market strategy and a product strategy for us to go after the cybersecurity market, specifically in the SIEM/SIEM category.
Yep. And now over the course of the 2 years, of course, no one envisioned a pandemic with us working from home and all the remote working and everything else. And I know that's not what our interview today is about, but just real quick, how is what's been going on kind of, influenced the mission over there?
Well, what I would tell you is this has actually been a catalyst for us. The company was already doing great, specifically in the cybersecurity realm. I mean, we recently won a large award with the United States Air Force to be a global scene for Air Force weapon systems. Great. It hasn't been publicly announced, but it is public information, so I'm not giving anything away. And we're going to have a record quarter this quarter, specifically around our security offerings. This whole work from home thing, this whole concept of now everybody's working out of their house has driven initiatives with large corporations that are warranted. Because, before I was worried about if Alan went to Starbucks or something while he was working. Now I have no clue what's going on Alan's home network or the home network of the thousands of employees that I've sent home. The attack vectors that could be executed there, especially against key employees. And so that's driven budgets to move quicker on the cyber side, especially when it comes to visibility detection. So we're busier than we've ever been.
You know what? Look, there's a lot of people out of work, and I'm not going to here to gloat or anything like that. But I am going to tell you something, that this whole thing has really put a spotlight on cybersecurity, Julian.
Absolutely.
Because even here at Security Boulevard, I just happened to do an analytics review with my team this week. Do you know, from February to now, Security Boulevard alone, our cyber site, has seen a 79% increase in traffic.
I completely believe that.
Almost doubling the traffic in the last 4 months. And that's, our other sites have, 3 to 4% a month over those times, but nothing like what we're seeing. And so, in some ironic way, this has been a catalyst for people to finally, and you've been in security as long as I have or longer, finally people are taking this damn thing seriously. Exactly. Right? And doing what they're supposed to do. Anyway, all right, we set a nice table, Julian. Let's talk about some news, though. Splunk recently released, you got to be splunking here. Devo recently released some news around a survey and some research. Talk to us about it.
Sure. So we started this last year with Larry Plonemon, specifically looking at, first of all, companies that had SOCs and what was the importance of it to them. And then more specifically, how are the SOC analysts getting along? What's occurring in their environments every day? We talk about SOCs like they've been around for 20 years. They've really only been here for 4 or 5 years in reality. So they're still at their infancy. And, I have yet to see a prospect or a customer who felt like they were doing it completely right. As we sell technologies into those environments, it was important to us, it started off selfishly. Let's figure out who we target the best, because we built a SIEM technology specifically focused on the operations within the SOC. And we were shocked at what we found. I mean, I knew it was bad, but these reports really paint a picture of people who are just overworked. They don't have enough capacity to do everything that they're supposed to do. And in many cases, they're really misaligned with what's going on in the business. The good news is, to your point, more and more businesses are realizing the importance of having a dedicated function or a SOC, or even doing a hybrid SOC where maybe the MSSP comes in and does tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 are retained internally to the corporation. But, the data we keep getting every year, it actually is shocking to me, meaning how bad the situation is and how much work needs to be done to fix the problem.
I agree with you. So in a prior life, I had co-founded a company called Still Secure out of Boulder, Colorado. And we, vulnerability management, network access control, intrusion prevention. And around 2006, I decided that security was just so damn hard, and that most companies, even if they wanted to try to stand up what was, then first starting to be referred to as a SOC, they didn't have the idea of standing up a 24/7 SOC. You can't do that with 3 security people. and so, I said, it's MSSP's got to be the way to go, right? And so you outsource your SOC, and you outsource a lot of it. So we bought an MSSP, actually here in South Florida where I live. No surprise. And we stood up a SOC, right? And this was, as I said, 06, 07. And, I can tell you that you need a minimum of 28 or so people if you're really going to do it 24/7 and have 3 shifts a day and all. And that was a relatively small thing. But the interesting thing is, first of all, finding people to man it was a whole, I could write a book about that. But, what do they actually do with the SOC? What do they cover? What is their responsibility, right? And kind of what's the mission, if you will?
Well, Alan, that's still, I would tell you, with the prospects, customers, and friends that I have in the industry, that's still probably the biggest problem. Is there's tons of misalignment. People want to put a SOC in place. It sounds exciting. They understand that having something that gives them a centralized view of everything, just like the old days, what we call the NOC, doing that for security is important. But there's not enough information and education in the market about, what are those core tenets of a SOC? What's the real mission of a SOC? And so what I usually find is tons of misalignment within the SOC itself. And then when you expand beyond that into the overall IT situation, it's just a mess.
Yeah. Well, and I think the lesson, Julian, is, and we see it even in, in military operations and everything else. If you don't have a clearly defined mission, and it's true in business, if you can't clearly tell me what success is, I bet you never win, right? Because you got to know what's the goal, what's the mission, what does success look like, and if you can't answer those things, don't bother, right? Because you're chasing your tail and forget it. Anyway, what do you think some of the key findings in this are that you can share with us?
Well, I mean, this is not going to be a surprise to you. You come from the industry. The number one finding is, as a whole, these people, meaning SOC analysts, are not happy with their jobs, no matter what tier they work at. The other thing that I found most amazing, because, the security market is still kind of technology du jour, but a lot of the complaints were around having too many tools, not really focused on the problems that they're trying to solve. That was quite amazing to me, actually. And then the thing that hit me the most that isn't said in the report, but it's obvious, is how organizations forget about the fact that they have to be able to grow these people, that they have to treat them like humans first before they treat them like the SOC analysts. And that's the unsaid thing that's in this report, is that these people obviously feel like second-class citizens in an organization that's considered to be second-class from the get-go.
You're 100% correct. And also, Julian, that goes to why we see actually such, the average guy in a SOC stays there, 12 months maybe? 9 months?
Maybe 12 months.
Yeah, and they just hop right to the next gig. And, one of the things I've learned both during my time doing as a vendor in cyber, InfoSec as we called it, and now in what I do here, is it's a lot easier to grow experts than it is to just hire. It's a lot cheaper too than it is to just hire experts.
Yeah, but Alan, I would tell you, you're different there. I think a lot of CISOs are now realizing that, but often they're looking for the next hired gun. But the person that you take can help go from tier one, let's say they're straight out of college, maybe they know something about cyber, but they can certainly look at a screen and look at events and perform some level of triage on them. Taking that person from tier one to tier three, and what we found in the going through the report, and also just anecdotally from my career, are the ones that are also most committed to the mission, whatever that mission might be for a given corporation. But one of the reasons they leave so quickly is they feel no commitment from the companies that they work from.
No, there's no allegiance. But allegiance is a two-way street, right? And so you got to give a little to get a little. And yeah, unfortunately, Julian, this is not new, right? This is, so I first got into managed checkpoint firewalls in 1998, 99.
Yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah. Was it OPSEC? Was the integrations with checkpoints? Anyway, I remember once, Julian, actually talking to a bank they didn't have CISOs then. He was the the VP of security or what have you. Yeah, they didn't have VPs either. But we were talking about vulnerability management and how to prioritize vulnerabilities and so forth. And I told the man, hey, if you could prioritize vulnerabilities, I was talking to your security people, they've worked 3 out of the last 4 weekends. If you could prioritize your vulnerabilities that they work on during the week, these guys don't have to come in on the weekend.
Right.
And the guy told me, he said, you know what, I pay my security people by the year. I don't pay them by the hour or the day. I don't care if they come in on weekends.
Yeah, and that's why he's going to lose them.
Well, yeah, and that's when I realized, much like in the porn industry, it's built on the backs of exploiting women, right? All too often. In a lot of ways, the security industry was built on the backs of exploiting security people, right? And it's a bad situation. But that's not, that's one issue. You mentioned the tools as another issue. That's another big one, right? We have shiny trinket syndrome in the security space, right? We always chase after the next magic bullet that comes in front of our eyes. And then we want more budget for that and more budget. But how much of it becomes shelfware? How much of it becomes noise that we just kind of try to filter out? I imagine that's a big reason for Devo, right? Is trying to filter that signal to noise ratio.
Well, the thing for us, Alan, is I think the biggest problem is most security teams are completely not in touch with the priorities of the business. Like even the example you just used with vulnerability management, back in those days, every vulnerability was treated the same, no matter what business you ran, right? So if I'm a vendor in the retail industry and POS is most important to me, I should make sure I at least have a fortress around that stuff, because not all vulnerabilities have the same weighting. The same is true in security programs. The biggest problem I see around the exploitation is the fact that usually the security executives are not in tune with what the business executives are looking for. So if we're going to have a discussion with any prospect, it doesn't matter how large they are, the first thing I always start with is, why is security important to you? What are the things that you're really trying to accomplish? And if I start hearing a lot of technobabble, rather than here's what's going on with our business, I immediately try and drive it back towards, but let's talk about what's important for this corporation or this entity, whatever it is. Because I think a lot of times the shiny trinket comes in, they use it for 2 or 3 days, rather than solving the problem, it just becomes another piece of noise adding to the clutter that they're dealing with. And to your point, the signal to noise ratio isn't there. And even for a technology like Devops, if we're not aligned with why you're doing security, they'll never be successful with my technology.
Agreed, 100%. Hey, Julian, I told you the time goes really quick here. We start talking shop and boom, it's done. We're over 20 minutes already.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
apologize. No, it happened. It's my fault. I talk a lot. But you know what? We didn't mention, for people who want to get information about this report, where can they go?
They can go to our website. So www.devo.com. You can download it and get all the information that you would need. And certainly they can reach out directly to us on the website as well if they want to talk more about how Devo can help solve some of these problems with their analysts and for their corporation.
Good stuff, man. Hey, Julian Waits, thanks for joining us on TechStrong TV, man. It's a pleasure having you on. Come back and visit us again. Don't wait so long. We want to hear more about Devo.
Actually, Alan, you'll be hearing a lot more from me. So we're revamping our PR program. We got new management in place, and you were one of the first outlets that they wanted to have us develop a rapport with and start working with. So you will be hearing more from me.
Fantastic, man. All right, Julian Waits, Devo Technologies. They got a new report out about what's going on with the people in your SOC. Check it out. This is Alan Schimmel on TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest. You know, in all my many years of working with the RSA conference, I've been really lucky to meet some just really extraordinary people. Two of those extraordinary people who I've now known for a good number of years are Linda Gray Martin and Brita Glade. Collectively, Linda and Brita are responsible for a lot of what RSA conference is about. Whether we're talking about the U.S. show or the international events that they've put on for many years. Of course, this year's a little different. RSA APJ, which is, I believe, July 15th, is going to be all virtual. Though it will be broadcast in Singapore time, anyone around the world is free to log in, and it doesn't even cost any money. They are just opening the doors up. Education is the theme, and they have some amazing, amazing content sessions. Education opportunities, networking, etc. The whole team at RSA conference has really worked hard at thinking and rethinking about what a virtual event can be, could be, should be. And of course, what we're seeing at RSA APJ may fall over as next year's RSA conference here in the US, which I believe will be in May, will be a hybrid event with both a virtual and in-person aspect to it. So really interesting things going there. It was so great to catch up with Linda and Brita. They really are fantastic people. Let's now go to my interview with Linda Gray Martin and Brita Glade of RSA Conference.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this segment of TechStrong TV. I'm really happy to have two of my friends join me today to talk about what may be the best virtual cyber conference virtual conference you're going to attend in the next couple months. With us today is Linda Gray Martin and Brita Glade, and collectively they are RSA conference in a lot of ways. They make so much of what you see year in and year out, whether it's the big US show or RSA APJ or any of the other RSA conference events around the world. Linda and Brita are driving so much of it. Ladies, welcome, and thanks for being on TechStrong TV.
Thank you for having us. We're thrilled to be here today.
Thank you. So, look, we have a lot of strong personalities on this show with me. I'm going to let you guys talk mostly. Linda, I wanted to start off with you, though, and really kind of, why we're doing virtual events versus in-person events. is obvious, right? I don't think we need to rehash it. But what I would like to share with the audience is a little bit of what went, timelines and thought processes, and because it's a big decision to pivot here. I mean, this is such a radical departure in so many ways.
It is. It was a very big decision, but it was the right decision, of course. We made it in early March, and the real driving force behind the decision is the health and safety of our attendees. That's absolutely our priority. So we announced, I think it was around the 11th of March, that we'd be shifting from a physical to a virtual event this year. But it is still focused on the APJ region, and it's important to us. We serve that community, and we want to continue serving that community. So to that end, our event will run in Singapore business hours from July the 15th to the 17th.
That's fantastic. And it's true, I was actually interviewing the CEO of a smaller security series of shows here in the U.S., and she was pretty adamant about, the Chicago virtual event. They only wanted people within 100-mile radius of Chicago. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't really work in a virtual environment.
If that was their objective, that's fine. I think what we see the beauty of this, especially for APJ, where it's a really big region, is that, it can appeal to people, and people can attend who may not necessarily attend our physical event in Singapore. And I think there's just such a beauty in that, it spreads it out to that larger APJ community.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sorry, go Brita.
Oh, sorry, interjecting. The other interesting thing is, cybersecurity, our community is international. We have no boundaries. And we know that even with a lot of the really good work that's been done, intelligence sharing, the importance of sharing across organizations, across geographies, so being able to bring together these experts really from across the globe and doing it virtually lends itself to different people participating. We've been super excited as we've looked at our registrations, the variety of places that people are coming from, and also from a speaker standpoint, the variety of places. So there's going to be some really rich dialogue across a global community in Singapore business hours.
Absolutely. And I was going to mention that, first of all, with the APJ region vis-a-vis U.S. time zones, European time zones, really the biggest inhibitor from APJ folks participating in, let's say U.S. time zone based events is that they have to get up in the middle of the night, right, to do it. And that's a pain. So the fact that it is APJ, the shoe's going to be on the other foot. If U.S. folks or European folks want to participate, let them log on in the middle of the night. But of course,
although, they can still see it on demand.
I was just going to say, on demand. Through the magic of on demand, it's available to everyone. The other thing, Brita, you mentioned, and I don't know if you have the facts and figures on this, but how many of the speakers are actually, out of APJ's zone based, either U.S. or Europe or elsewhere?
Ooh, you want exact facts and figures?
I mean a decent amount.
A decent amount are, yeah. And that's always been an interesting thing. We are very data driven at RSA Conference. We do a lot of conversation with our audience and who do you value as speakers? And we find that they look to RSA Conference to bring international domain experts. That's important to them. So it's program committee that makes the decisions for who is speaking, what they're speaking on, based on submissions that come through call for speakers. So everyone's evaluated the same into that funnel. I would say probably, and I don't have exact percentages for you, but I would say probably 30% of our speakers are from in region. The rest are from out of region, probably evenly split between Europe and US. And it would be an interesting study to do. I will find out exact percentages here. All are speaking about topics relative to the region. So examples, so I may have a researcher out of Czechoslovakia, but talking about specific threat patterns they're seeing impacting the region. So expertise is coming from across the globe for issues of particular import in region.
I'll make another point on that. You know, I've been lucky enough to go to RSA APJ at Singapore now for about 4 years. This would have been my 5th year. And virtual or not, we always have a decent international panel, right? People love to come to Singapore. It's an amazing place for a conference. The facilities there are amazing. Staying at Marina Bay Sands isn't the worst thing in the world either. And, you know, so they always have a great international panel of speakers to begin with. So what would be interesting, Brita, is as a comparison from last year to this year, what the different, you know, what's the difference in makeup of the speakers from local to non-local. But be that as it may, here's another important thing, Linda, I wanted to ask you to emphasize, which is generally one has to pay to attend RSA conference. And this is now free to everyone, right?
Correct. It is, yeah. And I think, you know, at the time when we were putting this program together, it was kind of 3 or 4 months ago. And I think that tends to be the norm with virtual content, certainly at that time. And I'm sure that's changing now. And we'll see different changes as we go over the next few months. But that certainly felt the right thing to do, taking everything into account this year.
I agree with you. And I think you're right. We are starting to see some virtual events starting to charge. Some are charging like a nominal fee that they're donating to charity, and some are really charging, you know, a few $100s. I don't know how that'll shake out. It remains to be seen. But, you know, so then the next logical question is, well, someone has to pay for this, right? And so there are sponsors. And talk to us about sponsors and how are they participating and what can we do to thank them for their sponsorship?
I know. Well, we do want to thank our community partners, we're calling them this year. So they're made up of our traditional physical event partners. So companies like Microsoft, Verizon, and RSA, of course, but also our partners in the media community who are coming on this ride with us, but also our partners like you. And we are thrilled that you guys are doing your very own virtual DevOps Connect seminar.
Yep.
We're really grateful for that. And I just think it is a great way to, you know, to keep engaging with the ecosystem around RSA conference that is really, really important. You know, SANS are going to be there running virtual net wars. We also have Hack the Planet and I Am the Cavalry who are going to be doing their own Capture the Flag tournaments. So it's been fantastic, the kind of support that we've had as we've gone through this process, and those strong partnerships have really come to bear with this.
Yep, thank you. And a shout out to the companies that you mentioned, honestly, because, you know, as I said, someone has to kind of foot bills here, and RSA and RSA conference themselves are also, you know, a major sponsor in making this happen. Brita, I'd like to turn to you for a couple of minutes, though. We don't have, you are the programming committee for the purposes of this call, right? Talk to us. Give us some of the ones you're really, you know, some of the sessions you really want to highlight that our audience should be looking at.
Yeah, it's hard to play favorites, as you know. And it's been interesting doing this in a virtual format. I have been able to work personally even more directly than usual with speakers. I've gotten to, you know, sit in on practice sessions, sit in on working with them on presenting in a virtual environment, because it is different, right?
Yeah.
And there is incredible passion across sessions. I'll dance across the tracks, if you will. We have 8 different tracks, plus the great track that is being put together by your team for DevOps Connect Day, which is great practitioners in and around DevOps specific content that will be happening on Wednesday, which looks great. They're all from in region and amazing names. So dancing across the tracks, we've 3 tracks each day. Wednesday is also complemented by the DevOps Day, so 4 on that day. There is one session that I participated in yesterday that I found fascinating, is from Delta Dental, talking about zero trust. So you know, we have heard vendors talking about zero trust for quite a while, right? Here's two practitioners talking about what have they done, what have they dug into, what experiences have they had, what benefits, what challenges. And we always love, it's that tipping point when you get actual organizations speaking about something versus the vendors. That one's
then it's real.
Yeah. And that was exciting. When that one came through, the program committee got super excited about that in particular, because suddenly there's a different conversation happening. So that one's one that I think will be interesting. The very lovely, always wonderful Carolyn Wong, she will be doing a session or in and around, hacking your own career. And, from an individual, personal perspective, but also from a leadership perspective, what can organizations be doing to support employees, to be helping to develop the right culture within their organization, hearkening back to our theme of human element and really, that nurturing the people part. You can't solve everything with technology. Process is certainly important, but the people part really is super important. We have some sessions where incident responders are going in deep. This is like a mystery novel, in deep on when they were responding to a situation, what did they find? And in one case, it was they started with a knowledge of one particular threat actor, and then through the course of the investigation, discovered not one, but two additional threat actors. And that will be providing some really tangible, granular advice on how should incident response be done? What should you be looking at? We do gear toward that. Anytime we have something within conference, we want to make sure it's actionable. We don't just want to, hey, things are really bad, have a great day, but rather here's what you should do next week as a result of what you learned. Here's what you should do next month. Here's conversation. We want people to come out of it with actionable guidance. And then the last one that I'll highlight is we have 3 cloud providers, Microsoft, AWS, and Google, coming together to talk about cloud safeguarding, the view from the cloud providers. And they'll be talking, amongst themselves. And, these are not, you can look at them as, they're competitors, but no, they're talking about from the cloud as a whole, what should we be doing? What could you be doing to be more secure? What questions do you need to be asking the third parties you're working with and such? So again, targeted toward tangible activities and what should you be doing? So that's just it's a really, just right on the very, very surface, there's a lot of amazing content.
There is.
There's not one session that I'm not excited about. And then we've also added, Ellen, we know that the interactive part of engagement is super important. These are great presentations that are going to be delivered out, but that interactive is where things shine. So we'll have a Slido chat that's part of every single session. So it's going to be real-time engagement right there with the speaker, helping you to build a network, because you'll also be participating with others who are watching this session, who share an interest in a topic, and the speaker. And then we've also added some Ask the Experts deeper dives. So for 6 of the sessions, we will have, video conference rooms where people are brought together. 25, we're limiting it so that it can be a deeper conversation. So 25 participants digging in deep on a topic that would have been presented by one of the speakers. So lots of ways for people to get involved.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I think that's an excellent case where we could use the virtual environment to do things that we couldn't do in person. Because a lot of the sessions may be pre-recorded with the speaker actually there live, the ability to actually sit and talk to the speaker while they're presenting and, about stream of conscious questions and issues around it. It's phenomenal, right? I think that's a great way. Doing the video room, I'm interested. I'm going to be there doing it with you, because it's something even here at Media Ops we've been trying to figure out. How do you bring that, right? I know there's got to be a way to do it, and I'm interested to see how you do it. I wanted to quickly talk on the Carolyn Wong thing, though. So Carolyn was on about 2 weeks ago. She's a friend, and we had her on TechStrong TV. This whole human element thing, and especially for my friends in the APJ region, right? look at Devops.com and Security Boulevard and Container Journal. We get about 1 million people a month. And I'm telling you, 20% of them come from India alone. And you know, the whole APJ region is very well represented. The numbers, of course, are staggering. We don't get, usually at Singapore, we don't see that full India as an IT powerhouse in Singapore. There's plenty of folks of Indian descent there, but the sheer numbers are. When we look at humans, all too, especially in IT, all right, a Java programmer is a Java programmer, a cyber engineer is a cyber engineer, but we need to value our humans in cyber more. It's much cheaper to raise a cyber engineer than it is to keep hiring a different one every 12 months. And so this is, I mean, for me, you know, your theme around humans and the human element, that's what it boils down to, is we need to value our humans, because giving these upskill, as we say at DevOps Institute, upskilling them, skill up, right? Getting them the skills. Watching someone, I've watched Carolyn, Brita, or Linda, I don't know if you remember, maybe 4 years ago at one of the DevSecOps events we did in San Francisco, Carolyn came literally waddling up to the podium. I think she was 8 months pregnant. I was afraid she was going to go into labor right on stage. But you watch her career and where she is now as Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt and what she's doing. That's a great example, and she's a great ambassador to bring that home. So good stuff.
Yeah, and I think the theme this year, honestly, has been one of the ones that's resonated the most. And because it doesn't matter where you live or what language you speak, humans are at the core of what we do.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's just been a really, really strong theme for us.
I agree 100%. We mentioned times, you know, it is on Singapore business time, which plays well for our friends also in Australia and New Zealand, Japan, even China, and so forth. So it'll play out there. It is on demand for folks maybe in the U.S. or North America, South America, or even EMEA who want to join in. Yeah. Guys, and Brita, you mentioned you scratched on the technology of the live interactivity, the video, but really, I mean, you're this is cutting edge stuff, right?
It is, and it's space that's changing. I mean, you know, you've
yeah, no, we know, we live it.
It's changing literally. I would expect a year from now some really amazing breakthroughs happening, and what our team and it's definitely our team, because we have an amazing. The RSA conference team is fabulous, and did a lot of research on, you know, what works for our audience. Audience first was what we wanted to do. We know what we are about at conference is creating an experience. So we even, you know, we're referring to this as a learning experience. It's more than just showing up and hearing something spoken at you. We know that people value the connections they make, those detailed, you know, the more in-depth water cooler conversation, if you will. Yep. That, you know, a physical event is, you know, is manifest with.
Yeah, no, it's the hallway. It's the hallway sessions, right? Yeah, right. That's something we've got to capture.
Yeah. So it's how can we do this? And we thought, well, you know, we want to eliminate technical challenges. And you know, there's buffering, there's latency issues, there's, oh gosh, construction might be being done in someone's neighborhood on any given week, or a tornado might be going through. We were recording something with someone and there's tornado warnings going on. So how can we eliminate technical frustrations for both our speakers and our attendees? So that turned into, we're gonna pre-record so that we can optimize things. But then how can we still deliver a real-time experience? Ooh,
interactivity.
This robust, but more robust than what we started with. And the speakers, frankly, got super excited about that. So it's like, wow, I can't do that. You know, in a regular, yes, you can have Q&A at the end, but here's real-time conversation. And you'll even see in some of the speakers where, hey, I want to tell me further about what you've got going on in your organization. And there'll be real-time engagement going on between speakers and attendees and other things. There'll be polling questions that start popping up within Slido. So we really tried to be experience first in what we delivered, layered in with, as Linda mentioned, these capture the flag, these interactive, these gamified experiences, which is how some people best learn and best engage. We'll have these Zoom rooms going on for breakout conversations. We have one specific to students. We've got some great partners in region with the universities, and it was important for them to be able to give their students exposure to practitioners and understanding career paths and such. So there's student-geared programming and engagement. So we've tried to put together an experience-first platform that we know will evolve over time. It would be remiss not to mention also the Resource Center, where these partners that we've talked about and others are offering assets and other ways to further engage. There's a networking lounge. We know that this platform and the way we do things will continue to evolve. Technology here is continuing to evolve. We're learning all kinds of things that will inform what you'll continue to see from us. Hybrid is very much here to stay. There's actually some very cool, interesting, different things you can do in addition to this audience from across the globe. So we're excited to continue to expand and enhance what we're doing in a virtual setting.
Absolutely. I mean, we're already looking at next year's platforms because we're evaluating new platforms here for us. There is so much choice out there. We don't have a lot of time, but this whole thing kind of logically leads to RSA US, right? Which is going to be a hybrid event. And from what I've read, I don't pretend to know more than you guys know, but it is going to be a hybrid event. It's been pushed back a few months into April, right? May, excuse me. I knew it was, and I want to keep the focus on the APJ event, but 30 seconds or a minute, real quick, either one of you, what's happening with RSA Conference US for next May?
So, it's a good question. I just want to say, our team puts an incredible amount of thought into every decision that we make. And this moving the conference to May was absolutely no exception to this. And based on many discussions, it was clear that an event in May would just help increase the safety of our attendees. So again, that is our top priority. And that's behind that decision. But yeah, we will be offering a virtual component alongside the event. So watch this space. It's still a work in progress. I don't think either Brita or I can pretend to have all the answers right now. Things are evolving quickly. We're staying very much on top of the evolution, and we'll let you know and keep you posted as we go.
Great.
I'll add to that, Alan. Again, we want to be responsive to our community. So community that's listening, if there are things that are important to you, if there's things you want to see, if there's things that, an idea that you have, please send those our way. Our call for speakers will be opening up in the late part of the summer. You'll see information about that on social and in the newsletters and all the other.
Right here as well.
Yay! So let us know what makes for you a super compelling experience, and we aim to serve this community.
Absolutely. Look, I personally pray we have a vaccine, a cure, or something that really kind of puts this in our rearview mirror, and we can get back to having great parties at RSA conference and worrying about getting back to your hotel room in time to get to the conference the next morning. But actually, it's been years since I did that. Forget.
Whatever happens, our mission, I think, remains the same.
Absolutely.
We will continue to bring the community together, and we will continue to provide educational opportunities. And that's
what RSA conference does.
So,
you know what, ladies, let me just tell you, we love partnering with RSA. I've always considered the mission of what we've been doing for the last 5-6 years with the DevSecOps program of bringing the security community and the DevOps tribe together and saying, this chocolate and peanut butter has to go together. It's going to be better. It's going to taste better than it will individually, and it's proven out. We continue looking forward to doing it with you. Best of luck. I am so looking forward to, it's July 15th through the 17th. But if you're watching this in the U.S., it actually is the night of the 14th.
Very good point. Yeah, 14th.
Right? Oh, I've done that on my airline reservations to Singapore. I thought I had a layover in LA and it wasn't. But yes, I know. Go ahead, Brita.
So it's 6 p.m. Pacific, yes, on July 14th to the, yeah, exactly. So be with us. Join us.
Absolutely. Linda Gray Martin, Brita Glade, RSA conference here on TechStrong TV. Thanks for joining us. We'll be right back with our next guest. For our archive piece today, we're again going to our TechStrong Con lineup of speakers, and I'm happy to bring to you Jessica Dean. Jessica is, she's just great to watch if you ever get a chance to catch her presenting, and you will right now on this. Her presentation at TechStrong Con was called Devops, Waffles, and Superheroes, and it's really a deep dive. This is not a marketing fluff. This is a technical piece, so buckle up. It's on microservices and Kubernetes orchestration and containers, all within the confines of it, or through the lens of a DevOps practices. Really great stuff. Let's now go to Jessica Dean from TechStrong Con on DevOps, Waffles, and Superheroes.
Hi, my name is Jessica Dean, and I'm a Senior Cloud Advocate at Microsoft. Today we're going to talk about DevOps, Waffles, and Superheroes, and we're going to have a whole bunch of fun. Now, before we dive right in, I want to make sure that we level set so that we can know what we should expect in the next 60 minutes. First off, this session was designed to get you thinking, okay? I really want you to think about what we talk about and the more of the practices and the lessons behind rather than the nitty gritty, right? This is just supposed to get you thinking in accordance with what you might already be doing. I also want to show you what's possible, maybe give you some ideas for something new that you can add into your own existing workflows. And most importantly, I really want to get you excited. And to do all that, at the very end, there's going to be resources where you can go and take everything that I've done today and recreate it in your own environments on your own time. That way you can learn on your own. Now, I think it's pretty safe to say that life runs on code, right? I think pretty much everyone knows that. When we think about what we have in our homes, even our cars use some level of code, our smartphones, life and what we use to kind of get through the day runs on code, especially now more than ever, being that we're in quarantine. Now, prior to COVID and quarantine, we used to get in our cars and drive to fun places, and the traffic system or the traffic lights that we would encounter when we did that uses 5 million lines of code. In fact, even luxury cars, or in particular, cars that rhyme with Schmeshla that we won't necessarily say, cars like that use 120 million lines of code. Even if you have a different car, every single vehicle has some sort of code that runs through it. Space shuttles, while not in common form of transportation, uses 400,000 lines of code. Actually, I thought it was interesting that luxury cars or cars in general use more code than space shuttles. And this little guy in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, I call him Scott Hanselman. He's one of my coworkers and somebody I actually work with. Now for him, his life literally runs on code. He's openly talked about it. It's something that's called body hacking. And he has an open source artificial pancreas that uses 160,000 lines of code. So yes, in all of these contexts, it's safe to say that life runs on code. Now again, outside of quarantine, when we used to go to sports games and the mall and have our smart devices anywhere in the world, life would run on code in our everyday to-day life. But now we're using those smart devices and TVs and Rokus and all of that inside our homes in even more heavily used environments, in particular to keep ourselves and our family entertained, to make sure that we have some level of happiness. But the engineers on the back end side of that are having to support that, are having to maintain that, are having to make sure that we're meeting customer expectations. Or let's take it into the concepts of maybe even schools or meetings and now having to have virtual events like this one. We use Zoom, or we use GoToMeeting or BlueJeans or Microsoft Teams. All of those obviously run on code, but not only do they run on code, we had to make sure that they could rise up to the unexpected and overnight level of demand, right? So in these contexts, how do we support this innovation and this experience to make sure that customers and ourselves are having good, solid experiences? That's going to be kind of what this session talks about. But we're also going to talk about waffles, mainly because I try to talk about waffles whenever I can. And in particular, we're going to talk about it today, and you'll see why. So I know I already set some expectations for this session, but now I want to talk about some technical goals that you can expect. First, we're going to learn how we can add Docker and Kubernetes support completely from scratch. Now, this is important, especially because a lot of what we've talked about uses microservices or maybe distributed systems on the back end. And I talked to a lot of engineers who want to get into microservices and Docker and Kubernetes and cloud, but they really don't know where to begin. And it can seem very overwhelming. So today we're going to learn how we can do that completely from scratch. We're going to learn how we can add in some automation, how we can very easily integrate this with Azure DevOps or CodeFresh. We'll talk about CodeFresh, which is a Kubernetes native CI/CD or continuous integration, continuous deployment system. Then we're going to actually deploy our application over to Kubernetes running on Azure. Finally, at the end, we're going to get some tips for running and deploying Kubernetes in production, in real-world scenarios. So first, let's go ahead and make sure that we set the stage. What exactly is DevOps? I'm so glad you asked. DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. Donovan Brown. Now, you might be wondering, okay, that sounds pretty great, but let me repeat one part of that sentence. Continuous delivery of value. DevOps isn't about pushing new features or getting this new sprint out the door. It's about continuously delivering value. The most important word on this slide is value. Because if we're not delivering value, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And more importantly, how do we know if we're delivering value? How do we gauge that? Do we have telemetry in place? If we are using distributed systems and abstraction and things are kind of getting lost in translation, how do we really see that value delivery when things are starting to get more and more complicated and stress levels are very high? We're going to talk about that today. Now, you might be wondering why containers? Why do we care about containers in this context? Well, first, for any of the developers watching, I'm guessing you've probably heard before, it works on my machine. Maybe you've said it. In fact, operations, you're probably laughing at this right as well, right? It's pretty common for us to say, I've packaged this up, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to IT or to my ops department. They start running it, trying to deploy it, and it doesn't work. Containers enables this write once, run anywhere application architecture. In fact, it sets us up for microservice architecture to where we now remove that bottleneck. Anything that you put in a container is going to work so long as it works outside the container, and in the container, it'll run on any system. It'll run on your system, my system, it'll run on Raspberry Pi, IoT devices. It's very portable and immutable. From an operations standpoint, we benefit from that portability. We benefit from standardization, from abstraction, to where we no longer have to make sure that our dev server and our test server and our QA and Canary and production and all these different environments are in alignment. I mean, previously, by the way, I used to be a systems administrator, and I remember when we pushed something over into QA that worked out well in test, somehow somebody had updated a version of Java and things were out of whack. We had to go back and now update the systems, and we don't have to worry about that when we utilize containers. On top of that, we can take advantage of higher compute density. We have a greater potential for scale. And by uniting both developers and operations, we really kind of hone in on that message of DevOps. In fact, prior to DevOps, it turns out the developers and operations were incentivized to actually work against each other. Now, why do I say that? Developers' jobs are to try to iterate as fast as possible. They want change as much as possible so that you can finally go to that next sprint, that next sprint, that next sprint. But operations' jobs is to keep the lights on. We want as little change as possible because if the lights are on and they're already working, I don't want you to release something that accidentally turns the lights off. So we would almost compete against each other for who gets to release what and who needs which permissions. But by utilizing something where we both can focus on that core definition of value, that ultimate point of what DevOps is, now we are both running in the same direction, where the developers and operations goal is to deliver that value. We can do so without worrying about any of the bottlenecks or things we could see in the past. And now we can actually focus on collaboration as a team and really embrace the heart of DevOps. It starts with people. Remember, DevOps is the union of people, process, and products. We have to get the people on the same page before we can move on to the rest. And that's one of the things that Container simplifies and makes easier. Now, today we're going to talk about Kubernetes. If you're not sure what Kubernetes is, and I did mention that this is a superhero talk, so if you happen to be susceptible to Thanos' snap in Avengers, and you've been gone for the past 5 years, we're going to remind you what Kubernetes is. It is an open source container orchestrator, and it was specifically designed to automate deployment, scaling, and management of applications. So it was designed to simplify automation. Now, I highlight simplify here for one very specific reason. Kubernetes is a beast. It is complicated. So some people see simplify and they laugh because how can something that is very powerful but also robust be simple? And we'll show you how we can make it simple today. First, we have a program called Draft. Now, a lot of people have probably heard of Helm, which is on the right side of the screen, and we'll talk about that if you haven't. But Draft, even fewer people have heard about. We created Draft as a way to streamline Kubernetes development and to actually simplify Helm. It helps you with your release automation. Now, Helm is the de facto Kubernetes package manager. It is probably the best way to package, find, distribute, deploy, and manage applications that are specifically designed for Kubernetes. It's powered by a template engine. So it actually has a template engine underneath that takes parameters or variables and parses them. So you only have to use essentially one file to control your entire deployment. And we'll show you an example of that. Because Kubernetes, while it was designed to simplify, because it's still hard and it's complex, Helm's goal was to simplify even further. So now I want to show you how you can get started with Helm, with Draft, with Kubernetes, and with Docker files completely from scratch.
All right, so I have a Maven project that's just a simple chat application. It's a Spring Boot Maven Java application that I actually didn't write and I forked from somebody else. And I did this to kind of show you just how simple it is to really get started with a project, regardless of what language or regardless of what level of maybe experience you might have with microservices. You can see on the left-hand side that while I have a lot of files, I don't have a Docker file. And if you're familiar with Helm, you know that I would have a charts directory, and I don't have a charts directory. So I'm going to use Draft, which is just a simple client-based command line tool. And I'm just going to do my first command, which is draft create. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter. Now this is going to go through and it's going to try to detect the language the application was written in. You can see that it finally detected Java after it found some YAML files, some shell scripts, some JSON files, finally realizes this is a Java application. Now it adds in a charts directory. We have some templates. And so I mentioned that Helm is based on a template engine. If we take a look at an example deployment file, you'll see that where I would normally have hard-coded things, I now have it replaced by something that's called values. In fact, values is highlighted multiple times as I start to scroll down. Now that's important because we actually control all of these values or parameters with one all-up values file that we will use. You can see that there's an external port, which is going to be the port that we connect the application on, and then the internal port, which is going to be the port that the application listens on. There's some resource requests, limits, ingress, stuff that we'll talk about as we go on. But one of the other files that I was given is a Docker file. You can also see I have a Docker ignore file, but we're going to use our Docker file itself. Now this is just a simple Maven Docker file. I can see right here that since it doesn't have Alpine in the base image name, that this is a Debian based image. And you can also see that the port that we're setting as an environment variable and we're exposing is 4567. Now this application actually listens on port 8080. So I'm just going to make some simple changes that really just requires me to know some very basic information about the application. Of course, if you're adjusting this to an application that you wrote, you would already have this information. And I'm just going to delete this dash with dash dependencies because we just want it to search for anything that's a wildcard.jar. We just want it to find a jar file. Okay, now we're going to go back up to that values file for our Helm chart. This is going to set us up to be able to release it into a Kubernetes cluster. I'm going to clear my terminal down here. I'm going to make that internal port match the port we just set in our Docker file, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now I'm going to go ahead and deal with this section right here, which is the resource requests and limits. Now, the request is the bare minimum of resources that the application needs. The limits is the maximum. Now, this corresponds to C groups, and I mentioned C groups and namespaces earlier. C groups is what a process can use. That's things like your hardware, your memory. That's stuff that the process physically is going to have access to. Namespaces, as we'll see when we actually end up running our application and releasing it, that's what a process can see. That's where you kind of can control the visibility of what the application or the process has access to. So I'm just going to do simple find and replace here, and I'm going to search for 100, and I'm going to replace that for 256. I want it to at least have access to 256 megabytes of CPU usage. I'm going to do the same thing for memory, but I'm going to search for 128, and I'm going to give that access to 512 megabytes. I'm just going to replace that, and I'm going to hit save. So notice that we've just made very simple changes, right? Now I'm going to go ahead and do draft up. And this is going to actually build the Docker image, and it's going to release it locally into a local Kubernetes cluster. Now I'm actually running this Kubernetes cluster as part of Docker for Desktop. So if I go into my preferences of Docker, you can see on the left-hand side, I have something that says Kubernetes, and all I've done is I've checked this box. That's it. I am not running any kind of crazy cluster. I haven't done any drastic configuration. I'm just running it locally so that I can kind of develop and get accustomed and familiar to this. So we're going to close out of Docker, and you can see that it released the application. Now if I clear, I could use the Kubernetes binary, which is kubectl, kubecontrol, or my personal preference to make everyone happy is just the letter K. And I'm going to do k get pods, and this is going to query the default namespace, which is just, I haven't specified anything. I could create an additional namespace and release stuff to that, but we'll deal with that when we get to the cloud. For right now, I've just released the pods in default, and you can see here's my pod that has been up and running for 44 seconds. I could even do k logs and actually see the logs of that application. I can see and make sure that it's up and running. Now, if I were familiar with Kubernetes, I could port forward and route a port from my local system over into the pod in the application that's running in the cluster. However, draft gives me a bonus command where I can actually do draft connect, and this is going to handle any of the proxying or connecting for me. In fact, if I scroll up here just a little bit, you're going to see this top line, where in particular, Spring Boot WebSocket Chat 8080 is the application and the port it's serving on. And it's being forwarded to localhost in this random generated port. So if I copy this, I can flip over here, and we're just going to paste this in, and you're going to see that the application is working, right? It's serving on this local host. I can type in JLDean, I can start chatting, and here's my wonderful application that's working. In fact, we can go back over to code. I can cancel this, flip back over to our browser, refresh, and the application is no longer available. So this is good because we were able to get started without much trouble. But I do want to also focus on the security part of this, because we talked about releasing things with increased velocity, being able to support this momentum, and being able to do things efficiently, but also in the right way. So let me clear the terminal, and I want to actually do Docker. Let's go ahead and do Docker images, and we're going to search for our Spring Boot image. Now, if I scroll all the way up here, you're going to see that one of the images we're using is almost 231 megabytes. That's the Debian-based image. But we also have an option to use a 131 megabyte image, and I want to show you how I created that. So I'm going to clear the terminal one more time, and I'm actually going to delete the Docker file entirely here. Now, I'm using Visual Studio Code, and there's actually an extensions marketplace where I can go to the extensions marketplace and search for Docker. Once I have the Docker extension installed, I can also use that to create a Docker file. So if I hit Command-Shift-P on Mac or Control-Shift-P on Windows, I bring up my command palette, and I can search for Docker. You can see one of my options is to add Docker files to the workspace. If I click that, it's actually going to allow me to select an application platform. So I'm going to choose Java because this is a Java application. I'm going to type in port 8080, and that's going to be the port the application listens on, and I simply hit enter. Now it tells me that the Docker ignore file already exists. That was what was created by draft, so I won't overwrite it. I don't have to worry much about that. But you can notice that it actually helps set up some increased efficiency by setting some Java ops parameters. It's now going to add in the target, which is going to be our compiled WebSocket snapshot. And then it also is running an Alpine-based image. Now, one thing I do have to consider is that it's adding something from the target directory. So we want to make sure that we also take a look at our Docker ignore, where it's actually said to ignore the target directory. So we're going to remove that, save that, and now we could go ahead and do draft up again to rebuild our application with this new file, which is now going to use that smaller and reduced image. So again, if we do Docker images and we search for that, you can see again that now we're using the smaller image. So that looks good, but there's one more thing I want to consider as we're thinking about production. First off, this application is actually running as root because I haven't set any user root levels or permissions. To do that, I can simply add in a line like this where I define the user to 1000, which is just a simple non-root user. And then I would use draft up again, make sure I spell draft correctly, and that's going to rebuild my image now with the appropriate permissions. Of course, there are a few changes I can make to my Helm charts and my values file to set this up for running now on the cloud because we know that it runs locally. For one, I can go ahead and add in some image pull secrets. This is so that I can push this image to a private registry, but still allow Kubernetes to have access to that private registry. So I could hit save there. And then we can also allow Ingress. And Ingress is going to allow traffic or internet traffic into a controlled host name. In fact, we can make sure that TLS is even enabled and that there's a security or SSL certificate. I can also add in things like application insights so I can get some metrics and telemetry, and this will help me gauge if I'm delivering that value that we talked about. Anything that exists in my values file has to also exist over in my deployment file. So for example, under spec, where I'm going to start setting the containers, I'm going to want to make sure that I add in if I have defined an image pull secrets and notice that I can use if statements, then go ahead and add in this section of YAML right here where the name of the image pull secret is equal to values.imagePullSecrets. So we go ahead and save that. I also need to make sure that I'm adding in that environment variable for application insights, that we're setting an environment variable for app insights instrumentation key is equal to values.applicationinsights.instrumentation key. Now let's save. Now the last thing I want to consider is the ingress so that our application is actually accessible externally. Now you'll notice that this is just a very simple ingress that draft gives us. I don't have any provisions for TLS, and I don't even have any annotations for if I want to set things like Nginx or application gateway, or if I want to kind of set what routing or what ingress control I want. So I just want to show you what it would look like if I were to change this. If I were to add in some if values ingress annotations, go ahead and add in the annotations. In fact, I can pipe this over and automatically handle the indent. If I scroll down to under the spec where it's going to set the host name equals to values.ingress hostname, which is what I've defined in the values file, underneath that spec, I can also say if TLS is enabled, go ahead and create my TLS certificates and my secrets for me. And I can just hit save. Now that we've done that, we would be ready to actually run this through a CI/CD pipeline and then make sure all our security of our application is also in place. That means checking things like our Maven dependencies, our binaries, and our Helm charts, our Docker files. We'll talk about that in the next demo. All right, so now that we did that, you might be wondering, that's really cool. I think I kind of followed, but you kind of lost me there. I'm still not 100% certain what exactly is a container. And I'm so glad you asked. First off, a container is not actually a real thing. It's not a virtual machine either. In fact, I usually will hear other people who've been in the industry for a while say, well, it's kind of like a virtual machine. It's not at all. It's an application delivery mechanism with process isolation. It's really just trying to deliver your application, and it's doing so by isolating processes. It's based on several key Linux kernel features. So if you are used to Windows, or you're used to maybe more of a non-Linux environment, some of the phrases like namespaces and C groups might be foreign to you. So we'll talk about that. But my easiest way of explaining what a container actually is saying that it's pretty much like a waffle. And here's why, bear with me.
First off, this waffle is a little bit too exciting already. How many people like to eat their waffles completely plain? No syrup and no butter. They just want the waffle. Some of you might enjoy that, sure. But for me, when I eat that waffle, I feel like it's missing something. It hasn't delivered that happiness to me. For me, I like to add all the extra fixings. I want syrup and I want butter and I want whipped cream and strawberries and blueberries and pecans and whatever else I can add on it. The more I add on top of that waffle, the more that waffle becomes a delivery system for value or happiness to my stomach and to my life. So I like to compare that pretty much think of container as it's just a waffle. You're just trying to put on top of it or within it, you can bake chocolate chips in a waffle, but you're just trying to put what's in that delivery mechanism that's going to deliver value and happiness. That's it. That's your end goal of what a container is, which is why I said I was going to talk about waffles. Now, here's why I say it's not virtualization. Let's go ahead and compare virtualization versus containerization. First off, there's two types of virtualization. You either have your host operating system sitting on top of bare metal, and then your hypervisor sits on top of your OS. And within your virtual machines, you still have a guest operating system, your dependencies, your application, and all of that gets bundled up. But virtual machine A differs from virtual machine B, and virtual machine B differs from virtual machine C. Now, in the second type of virtualization, you have your hypervisor that just sits directly on top of bare metal. Maybe in this case, that's like VMware, ESX or ESXi. But in that same scenario, you still have an independent operating system with independent dependencies and independent applications, where each VM differs from its fellow VM living on the host. Now, containers is a little different because you still have your infrastructure and a host OS, but then you have a Docker engine that sits on top of that. Even when you're using Kubernetes, you still have a Docker engine as the under layer engine that's essentially your container runtime. And within your container, you have everything you need to deliver that value. Within your waffle, all you're doing is putting the application right alongside whatever you need to actually deliver that. So let's take a look at it a little bit differently when we can think of the benefits of using these containers. Why would we care about waffles or just delivering just the key things? First off, it gives us some value like repeatable builds and repeatable deployments. We no longer have to worry about, I bundled all this up, I'm going to hand it off, and now it doesn't work. It's going to be something that's reliable. It's also much faster to start up than a virtual machine. Virtual machines are big, they're complex, they can be bloated. A virtual machine can be over 20 gigabytes if it's a Windows VM. Even Windows containers are 1 or 2 gigabytes, so we already shrink that significantly. Linux, you can shrink even more. The smaller the container, the faster boot up, and the better security because it's a smaller attack surface. So your goal is also to create the smallest containers or the smallest waffles possible. Though in my life, I like to eat a lot of waffles, so I kind of like them big. But that's a story for another time. You package your dependencies right alongside your application. Remember, you only include what you need to deliver that value, what's going to actually make your application work. And as I previously mentioned, containers run everywhere. So I can build a container, hand it off to you, and you can run it on your system, regardless of if it's Windows or Linux or Mac. In most cases, Windows containers get a little bit more specific, but the best part is they can run anywhere. You can run it on your Windows machine, and I can run it on my Windows machine. You can run it on your Linux machine, and I can run it on mine. And we can sit there and we can know that we have confidence in this reliability and repeatability. Now let's talk about Kubernetes architecture and how it actually works. And if you aren't new to Kubernetes and you've already seen this, great. We're going to have a demo where we can tie all this together, but I really want to make sure we're all on the same page. In a self-managed instance, meaning something that you aren't paying a cloud provider to take care of for you, you're going to have what's called the master node. Sometimes this is also referred to as the control plane. This has your API server, your etcd, your scheduler, controller manager, cloud controller. This is all the resources that you need in this master node. This master node then communicates to your worker pool or your agent pool. And this is where you have your individual worker nodes. Your worker nodes are going to have container runtimes on them, and then your pods or your deployments are going to have containers running within them. That's where we're looking at our agent pool with our various pods. Now, there's a Kubernetes endpoint that you're going to communicate with this master node that will then take any of the information you deploy, your manifest, be it a JSON file or a YAML file, and it'll schedule it and push it out to this agent pool. Now, you as the user are going to do so using that workload definition, whatever manifest file you've written it in, straight hard-coded YAML or JSON file, whatever, and that gets sent over to the API endpoint. However, in a cloud managed scenario, so for example with Azure, we take care of that control plane. In the previous example, you'd be responsible for everything. Patches, software updates, hardware updates, everything, canonical upgrades. It can get very overwhelming. One of the benefits of having a cloud provider take care of the control plane is it lessens the overhead you as the user has to worry about. Instead, all you have to focus on is that workload definition, hand it over to Kubernetes, and wait for the control plane to schedule it to your agent pool. Okay, so it's a lot simplified, a lot more simplified. Now, I want to show you how we can add DevOps to all of this. We took the application and we added some Docker files and some Helm charts, and we made it more cloud native locally. We saw how we could do that in the previous demo. So now I want to take that same bit of code and that same project, and I want to go ahead and add a dash of DevOps to it and actually deploy it over into that cloud managed Kubernetes cluster running on Azure. Let's check it out.
All right, so I want to check in the changes that we made, and I'm just going to say demo updates, and I'm going to commit and say, oh, and I have to make sure that I stage them, so I'll say yes, and then we're going to go ahead and push. And that's going to actually kick off a pipeline. So let me flip over to the browser here, and I want to start with CodeFresh. CodeFresh is a Kubernetes native CI/CD or continuous integration, continuous deployment platform. One of the reasons how come I like it is over on the left-hand side here, you can see DevOps insights. I can see insights into what specifically is running in my Kubernetes cluster. So you can see I actually have quite a bit of different services and I have all these different namespaces. Remember, namespaces in C groups. C groups is what a process can use, namespaces is what a process can see. So you can see that I have things in my default namespace. Now you're not going to see what we deploy locally because that was just what I dealt with locally in Docker. But we are going to fire off, and we already have because there's a trigger anytime I check in something to my GitHub branch for that Spring Boot ChattyBot application, it's going to actually run through a pipeline. And it's going to deploy out into one of these namespaces. We'll go back and look at the pipeline. You can also see anything for my Helm releases that I have, and you can see that I have Spring Boot, ChattyBot, ChattyBot Dev. And this is actually the ChattyBot Dev and ChattyBot is going to be the releases that we're going to work with today within CodeFresh. But one of the reasons how come I love CodeFresh is every single step actually takes place within a container. So it gives me a lot of isolation and a lot of control. So to actually build my jar file or my target file, I can actually use JFrog to do that, which is going to pull down my artifacts from a controlled repository. So we kind of talked about control a little bit, and you want to have some security. You want to make sure that you're regulating what you're releasing over into production. JFrog allows me to actually use dependencies and binaries, and I can couple that with security scanning to make sure that whatever I'm releasing doesn't have any known security exploits and actually meets my corporate or my enterprise policies. You can also use things like you can use things like Aqua and Twistlock if you want to do that also with containers or Azure security. My goal for this pipeline was to show you that regardless of what your end goal is, regardless of what tools you want to use, your end goal is going to be continuously delivering that value. So you can see here that the steps are going to kind of be the same. We're going to build our Docker image. We're going to promote over into our private repository, which is going to be, again, something we can control. We're going to package up our Helm chart. We're going to lint that chart where we're going to make sure that there aren't any errors. We're going to publish our build information, and then we're actually going to run our security scans. Now, I've even added in some chat ops to this where I can actually get some information about the build, whether or not it was successful, whether or not it had any security issues. That's going to get sent over into Slack. I'm going to be able to then decide based on that information if I want to go ahead and promote into my different environments. Now, this was just structured in YAML, and it's less about the coding and how you wrote it and more about the thought process behind it. You can see that this is still building. You might be able to hear some notifications in the background. That's actually notifications firing off over into Slack telling me whether or not it's successful. In fact, we can drill down into some of these and you can see the logs that ran based on, again, running in these containers. Right now, it already published our security information and our build information over to Slack. So we can head on over there and you can see right now, here's where I can choose to promote right from within my Slack channel. In fact, I can click on my build artifacts and be taken over to my JFrog portal where I will be prompted to log in. Just go ahead and click login here. And this is where I can kind of make decisions based on my builds. In fact, we're going to go into the most recent build here and you can see here's my build ID. I can even have a direct link back over into my server that ran that build and you can see the X-ray status. Previous builds I've run sometimes have high. My most recent one has medium. Based on policies that I've set for my enterprise, I've said that medium is appropriate, meaning that that will allow that build to pass. So if we go back over to Slack here, you can see that that's why that scan report passed. If I scroll up to previous scans, you can see we'll find one that failed. Should be a few builds ago. Here we go. This one failed because the X-ray scan report failed. Okay, so we can just set those policies accordingly. I don't need to show you how one failed, but again, it's based on policies. You can see that here's one artifact that I have, which is actually my Helm chart. So I have all of that in one place. I have my Docker files and my manifest in one place as well. And I also have the X-ray data of what violations, what was found, what security vulnerabilities. And I can take a look at this and see, okay, I'm using the OpenJDK. In production, probably I would want to actually own this image. I might want to patch some of these things. But for the sake of today, we can kind of use this information and go back to the end goal of what's going to allow us to continuously deliver value. Is this going to be something that's going to impact our delivery or our sprints, or is this something that we can go ahead and push now and then plan for mitigation in the future? Now, there's no wrong or right answer. This is going to be something that you get to decide. But the cool thing is while I did all of this in CodeFresh and I can go ahead and click yes to approve, I want to also show you in Azure DevOps. In fact, if I go back up one level, you can take a look on how Azure DevOps is also deploying. Now, the same exact steps that I listed in CodeFresh, I actually have listed also in Azure DevOps. So I'm still building my Maven package. I'm still building and pushing. I'm linting my Helm chart. I'm packaging that off. I'm triggering off the Slack notifications. So if I go back over to my Azure DevOps Slack channel and we scroll down, you'll see that I have the same exact information here. It's less about the tools that you're using and the products and remembering the definition of DevOps. It's about the union of people, process, and products. Products is last. We need to make sure that people are on the same page and that we have a process that is going to continuously deliver value. And then we find the products that meet that end goal of delivering value. So let's flip back over just to our Azure pipelines, and you can go ahead and see, let's go ahead and take a look at a previous release. You can see that we've deployed to dev and we've deployed to prod. In fact, if we actually want to see our application live, where we can actually type in our username, so I'll just type in JL Dean and I can do hello, whoops, let me type in hello correctly, hello world, hit enter, and our chat application works. And we have a surprise at the end where I'll kind of wrap everything up here, but this is really how we tie in the DevOps part of our thought process when it comes into microservices, and then thinking of how we can really support this innovation we talked about in the very beginning. All right, so now you might be wondering what just happened. First off, we have all our code that's living out on GitHub. We push that over into, or by actually pushing a change right over into GitHub, we've triggered a pipeline over into Azure DevOps and CodeFresh. Now remember, CodeFresh is a Kubernetes native CI/CD system. Azure DevOps is Azure's completely extensible DevOps platform and system. So we have Azure pipelines, we have Azure artifacts, we have Azure boards. It's our all up DevOps system. But for today, we specifically used Azure pipelines with YAML builds, and CodeFresh is also YAML, to create a Kubernetes pipeline. In that, we were able to build our Docker images, package up our Helm charts. We even used third-party products like JFrog Artifactory to manage our binary artifacts. We used X-ray to actually do some dependency scanning. So we scanned any of our artifacts as well as our Helm charts and our Docker files. And then finally, we deployed all of that over to Azure. And the best part is once we kind of think about this from a very logical perspective of we need to build, we need to use Helm, we need to deploy, the rest of these
tools kind of fit into place. And we'll talk about how we kind of came to decide that. One of the biggest questions I get asked is, what tools should I use? Should I use Azure DevOps or CodeFresh or Travis CI, Jenkins, Octopus Deploy, Google, Twistlock, Artifactory, AWS? There's so many different wonderful and great tools out there. And I'm going to tell you right now, the answer is to use what works. Use what works for you. Use what's going to ultimately enable that continuous delivery of value. Because again, if you're not delivering value, there's no point to what we're doing. So let's think about this in a very, very simple spot. KISS. Now, that's not the band, okay? And it's not even calling your neighbors something mean. What I mean is keep it super simple as you possibly can. Don't overthink it. The steps you take don't have to be big. They just have to take you in the right direction. Gemma Simmons, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like I said, superheroes talk. One of the biggest things that I have conversations with when it comes to starting with Docker and starting with Kubernetes is engineers always have this really amazing heart. They want to go big. They want to immediately get all the way over to the end goal. But even when it comes to Kubernetes, one of my coworkers, Eric St. Martin, Kubernetes isn't the thing. It's just the thing that's going to get you to the thing. It's just the next thing. The most important step we take is the first one. And it doesn't have to be a big step. So we start out small and we see which tool or which product is going to enable us that continuous delivery of value. You can ask yourself some key questions in helping you figure out what delivers value. First, ask yourselves, what are my main objectives? What am I promising my customers? What's going to meet that customer expectation? What are the indicators that I'm meeting those objectives? How do I know if I'm actually delivering that value? This is where we can start thinking about things pragmatically. You can also ask yourself, in consideration with DevOps and pipelines and structure, what is your pipeline going to look like? Think about the tasks that you're doing manually already. First off, you're probably compiling your code, right? You're going to build and you're going to push it somewhere. This is regardless of whether or not we're using containers, but in this context, we build our Docker image and we push it somewhere. And then we're going to want to scan because we're going to want to make sure that we've linted our code. We're going to want to make sure that we don't have any vulnerabilities or security exploits. And then we're going to deploy over to a dev test environment. We're going to run our testing and our gates, and we're going to make sure that everything still looks good. Then we might promote over to QA. We'll rinse and repeat our testing and our scans and make sure everything still looks good. We'll rinse and repeat over into prod. Now, anything that we're going to use with that structure of what we want to do, compiling, building, scanning, we're going to find a private package feed that, again, helps us deliver value. We're going to find a private repository. Maybe we'll use something like X-Ray or Aqua or even Azure Security to do our vulnerability scanning. Then we can use CI/CD. That's where we can use Azure Pipelines, CodeFresh, Jenkins, Travis CI, whatever helps you deliver value. In a lot of cases, you don't have to abandon what you're already using. In fact, we see people who are using Jenkins still for their build and then leverage Azure Pipelines or GitHub Actions for the release, or even leverage GitHub Actions and Azure Pipelines together for build and release. There is no wrong answer as long as it's going to deliver value in the simplest way. Then you can tie in Selenium and White Source Bolt and do your testing. And then you'll rinse and repeat with your CI/CD again. Just create an outline of what's going to help you meet those objectives and deliver that value. No matter what tool you choose or what platform or what cloud, the foundation is going to be the same. Ask yourself the big question. Does this add value or does this add unnecessary complexity? Sometimes we can start overthinking things and say, well, we're going to add in an Azure function with a Twilio button and all these different things that's going to then do chat ops and send this over to this Slack channel. And that sounds really cool, but you can also just use curl to post a message and then be done with it. You don't have to go outrageous. You just have to ask yourself, does this add value or does this add unnecessary complexity? At the end of the day, remember, it's just a waffle. All you're trying to do is just deliver that value. Whatever that delivery system is and whatever that value that you're baking in there, that's all you're focusing on. We don't have to overthink it. Now, I want to talk to you about one more thing. In the demo and everything that we went through, we did a really great version of delivering that application. But what about our actual infrastructure? And sometimes this gets not really considered or it gets overlooked. So for lack of a better phrase. When you deal with Kubernetes and abstraction and Helm, and then you start having more and more things tied into it, it gets a lot harder to consider about not only making sure that we're delivering value from our application, but delivering value with our infrastructure. If something were to go down and fail, how would we recover? How would we get back up? So today I want to show you the same pipeline that we just went through, but I want to show you with GitHub Actions. And one of the first stages you're going to see is how everything it took to build the Kubernetes cluster, get it standing up on Azure, and be able to actually handle the deployment in the final stages that you've already seen, we just did with GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions allows us to automate our workflow. We can still do the same build, testing, and deploying with confidence. It's just another way of doing things. Again, just look at this from the thought of, can I add this in to maybe something that I'm already doing? Do I have the same level of reliability if my entire infrastructure environment were to fail? And the best part about Actions is it's entirely customizable, especially if your code is already on GitHub. You don't have to leave GitHub to use it. So let's check it out.
All right, so I want to show you the same pipeline that we went through previously with CodeFresh and Azure DevOps, Azure Pipelines, only I want to show you with infrastructure as code, or our Kubernetes infrastructure also in mind. So to do that, I use GitHub Actions. And again, the point of this is just to show you how, remember the end goal, less about the tools, what's going to help you keep it super simple and deliver that value. Now, using GitHub Actions, I could create an all-up master pipeline where, for example, we not only build our images, deploy our microservices over to dev and prod. And if you look at build images, we're still doing our Maven build with JFrog. We're still logging into Docker, building and pushing our image up to a private registry, linting our Helm chart package, doing our Slack triggers, and deploying to our various environments, okay? But we're also now labeling some pods for network policy. We're starting to add in some greater security with production in mind, even leveraging the same thing over into prod. I can then choose to lock down anything based on that network policy. Now, we're not going to dive into that, but in order to make sure that this cluster supports those things, there was quite a bit of infrastructure configuration. So I added that in as part of my CI/CD process. Since I'm using Azure, I made sure that we had a resource group. I made sure that we had a virtual network and a subnet, and I set up all the back-end infrastructure. We even leveraged virtual node, which is a way that we can virtualize and take advantage of Azure container instances if we wanted to get into scaling and serverless. This is a very robust cluster where not only are we delivering value through our application, now we're making sure that even in the event of a catastrophic failure, we can still recover very quickly. In fact, this entire pipeline, if the infrastructure or if the cluster didn't exist, would take just about 30 minutes to redeploy everything. We're setting up Nginx, we're setting up certificate managers. That way it'll auto provision that SSL certificate. And the best part is if we drill down into the CI/CD and we take a look at our workflow file, we're just doing some common sense things. Let's go ahead and bump up this font here. We're setting some environment variables. We're setting some infrastructure as code, which we're having checked in right alongside our application code. So we know if there's any changes both to our application and to our infrastructure. We're using Azure CLI to create our resource group and our virtual networks, which are the same things we would do locally. In fact, we've even added in some if and else statements to do an idempotent check for if virtual networks exist. This is important just because if there's already resources attached to these networking components, if you were to rerun these commands, whether manually or through a pipeline, you get a failure. So we can actually tie in some automation to this as well and have additional confidence built in to our value delivery. All of this is going to be available for you to check out and kind of scroll through and learn from. In fact, you can see where we're setting up our backend infrastructure. We're actually doing a group deployment creation, which is using an ARM template. So we have that set up in JSON. And again, that is stored right alongside our actual application. In fact, if we go back up to the root here, you can see I have my infrastructure as code folder. I have my GitHub workflow. If we scroll down, you can see that I have the Azure Pipelines YAML, the CodeFresh YAML. Everything is right alongside, and each pipeline is doing the same thing, with the exception of GitHub Actions adding in that extra layer of confidence with consideration to our infrastructure as well.
All right, so now that we did that, you can see that nothing really changed. We just added in infrastructure reliability as well. We still were able to build, we still were able to package, and we deployed our application over to Kubernetes on Azure while still leveraging our Kubernetes repositories over in Artifactory and X-Ray for image scanning. So now let's go ahead and talk about those best practices when you're running Kubernetes in production. First off, you want to build small containers. We really want to focus on multi-stage builds because it helps us make that small Docker image, because at the end of the day, all you need is what you're actually going to run. The smaller your image is, the more secure it is, the better it performs, the faster it starts up. So we really want to build as small of a container image as possible. We also want to consider our application architecture. This means using namespaces. This is important for security. Along the same lines, we want to use RBAC for role-based access control. And Helm. Helm is a best practice, and it is the way that we recommend to deploy out your application. So rely on Helm charts. Along with using Helm, you can also implement health checks. This is setting up things like liveness and readiness probes, so you make sure that your application is ready and healthy. And if not, the Kubernetes scheduler will attempt to restart that and make sure it's healthy. Set some resource requests and some limits so that you can know if it's starting to have a memory dump or a memory leak, kill it and restart it. And again, the Kubernetes scheduler, because it's self-healing, will be able to do that. Finally, be mindful of your services. You can map external services. You don't have to run everything within a distributed system. In fact, I get asked all the time if I would run my database in Kubernetes. And certainly there's some cases where you can, but you can also use database as a service as an external service and still connect that over to your running containerized application. Finally, one of my other big things is don't rely on load balancers. You can actually use proxies or traffic managers to handle routing. Load balancers are expensive, both from a cost perspective and a time management perspective. And if you were to use something like Nginx Proxy, you can actually have multiple services and applications all using the same load balancer. Now, finally, my name is Jessica Dean. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm a senior cloud advocate for Microsoft, and I'm here frankly because I love community and I love technology. I tend to focus heavily on all things Linux, open source, DevOps, and containers. Non-technical facts about me is I love Disney and CrossFit, fitness. I love shoes. If you follow me online, you can definitely connect with me on a personal level by following me on Twitter or Instagram. My last name has no relation to James Dean, so it's spelt with 2 E's, not EA. And then finally, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and GitHub at JLDean, D-E-E-N. All of the resources for today's talk, everything I went through, can be found online at aka.ms/jldean/waffleops. Finally, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you today. Cheers.
Back here in the studio now for our news roundup. As usual, I'll give you a couple of headlines around our media ops sites. I don't know, I say it every time. I don't know if you listen, but it's really just a couple of headlines. Go check out Devops.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard for the full show. But let's see what we've got. Over on Container Journal, new article, IBM shows COBOL running on Kubernetes. Who would have thought? Pigs do fly. Actually, I'm not surprised. We get such interest on COBOL from our audience, so it was only a matter of time. So pretty cool stuff there from IBM. Go check that out. Over on Devops.com, right out of Star Trek, we have the trouble with tribbles. No, it's not tribbles. It's the trouble with tools. And good article, though, on DevOps tools. Check that out. And then another good one, how to overcome challenges with Lambda logging. And if you're using AWS Lambda and you have issues with logging, this article's for you. And then finally, over to Security Boulevard, scraping by, Facebook sues mobile platform Massroots for scraping user data. You know, I'm not even going to go there. I mean, I actually have an appointment with an attorney right now for people scraping Security Boulevard content illegally, and they won't stop when you write them. So anyway, don't do it if you're not supposed to, but read the article, see what Microsoft's up to about it. And then also, how to reduce cyber risks, strive for SecOps. So, we're starting to see the SecOps, DevSecOps, but, you can reduce your cyber risk, and it is involving security working with ops and DevOps. So check that article out. As I say, it's just a few headlines. Check them out. Check out all the other great content, as well as the webinars and ebooks and library and everything else we have there. I hope you enjoy it. Now it's time to go to our managing editor, Charlene O'Hanlon, who has both a webinar preview and a great interview lined up. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, managing editor at MediaOps, and I am so excited now to be having a conversation with Ben Hindman, who is the CTO and co-founder of D2iQ. Ben, thank you so much for taking a couple minutes and talking with me today. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. Well, first tell me a little bit about your company, because I'm not super familiar with you guys.
Sure. Yeah. So we started 2013. So it's been a while now. We started as a company that was focused on containers before even Kubernetes and Docker were really a thing. My co-founders and myself were at some of the big tech companies, Twitter, Airbnb, and we were helping them to kind of move into this containerization world. And there's a couple technologies that we were using in prominence. One was Apache Mesos, and that's kind of our original company name was Mesosphere. We transitioned eventually to a new name, D2iQ. Happy to talk about that in a little bit. But we were kind of there helping people actually do containers in the early days. And then as Kubernetes came on the scene, we became a big part of working in the Kubernetes community and helping people to adopt Kubernetes as their container platform of choice.
All right. Yes, I do remember Mesosphere. So thanks for making that connection for me. Appreciate it.
No problem.
So Kubernetes, I guess it recently had a 6th birthday. Yay.
It did, yes.
Kubernetes, yeah. They grow up so fast,
Everyone does, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So since you guys have been kind of there since the early days, it'd be interesting to get your perspective on, first of all, really where Kubernetes kind of got its start, and where you kind of see, well, what you saw, like what the early days were kind of like for Kubernetes starting out.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was really interesting. I think we've there was this love-hate relationship, I think, with virtual machines and developers and operators trying to figure out how to provide a better environment for developers to build software. And what kind of emerged on the scene 7-8 years ago or so was this idea of containers. And what I think, with companies like Docker, what they first really helped to do was make the creation of containers, the packaging of containers, the storage of containers, all that stuff really, really easy. But what was sort of missing was then how are you going to orchestrate those containers? Where are you going to run them? And there'd been a lot of different technologies that had existed to create sort of this PaaS environment, platform as a service, which is really even higher level than containers or anything like that. It was more focused at the application level. And what was sort of happening in sort of, the heydays of Kubernetes, the early days of Kubernetes, was people wanted a platform that was at the container level, that was, orchestrating at the container level, not so much at the application level, definitely not at the virtual machine level, something that really fit that. And that's what everyone was really looking for. And there were, a bunch of different technologies that were being created. There was Apache Mesos, which had come out of UC Berkeley, and was being used at pretty massive scale by, a bunch of the big tech companies, Apple, Uber, Twitter, Netflix. I think for those big tech companies, that technology was perfect. It was at the container level. It was helping them, run containers at massive scale. But it was pretty complicated to take a piece of technology like Mesos and go run with it. And what Kubernetes really did was it sort of showed up with still at the container level, but an even easier, more approachable way of getting people to be able to orchestrate their containers. And that was kind of, that's what it did in the early days, 6 years ago. And I think we all saw that at D2IQ, formerly Mesosphere, that was really an even more approachable way for people to be able to run containers. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why, we jumped in early to help. So that's a little bit of history, like where it was coming from, why it was sort of the right time to really be there and have people start adopting it.
Did the popularity of Kubernetes kind of come as a surprise to you? I mean, it just seems like all of a sudden Kubernetes just exploded. Everybody was talking about it for a while. So, and it's, since kind of become the de facto. So, was that a surprise to you?
I mean, it wasn't a surprise to me that there would be a de facto container standard. I think that, as I was mentioning, people didn't want to be at the low level of VMs. People didn't want to be at the PaaS level. I think everybody was kind of clamoring for something. And, in some ways, the presence of an Apache Mesos and a Docker Swarm and a Cloud Foundry that was trying to run containers and an OpenStack that was trying to run containers and a Kubernetes was kind of paralyzing for the industry. It was kind of paralyzing for the community. What should we do? So, I think it was, to me, what was clear that once there was going to, be something more of a standard, then, it was going to explode massively. And I think that the Cloud Native Computing Foundation is really what helped to solidify that when Kubernetes became sort of the flagship project to the CNCF. And that was kind of history.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do know that, an entire ecosystem has kind of been built up around, the Kubernetes and the CNCF project. So definitely got a huge boost there. So, with that in mind, though, looking forward, what do you kind of see happening for Kubernetes and related technologies as we see more organizations adopt containers, containerization, and the entire ecosystem around it?
Yeah, well, ironically, perhaps, as I sort of alluded to earlier, I think that we're going to go even higher level, more at the application level, and we'll see more of a resurgence of like PaaSes. Mm-hmm. I think as an industry, as programmers, as engineers, as computer scientists, we sometimes have a hard time jumping too many abstraction layers at a time, because we like to know how all the pieces work below us. Sure. So, when we first went to VMs, that was great because it was just like a machine, just virtual. When you kind of jumped all the way to PaaSes, I think a bunch of people in the industry were like, "Oh, this is too high. I need a lower level abstraction layer, which was the container orchestrators, Kubernetes, and the like." But I think, honestly, most of us at the end of the day don't want to deal with that stuff. Once we understand how it works, it's still too complicated. And we'd rather just launch our applications. We'd rather just run our containers.
Right.
So, but my sort of prediction of the future is going to be that there'll be even more focus on those higher levels. But now will be the right time for those higher levels because we'll all have a much better collective community understanding of what's below us. And so we can do the higher levels and be okay with it.
Interesting. Well, Ben, I do appreciate your insight here on Kubernetes. It's a topic that I'm sure we're going to be talking about for a while. Especially as more organizations do adopt containers and microservices, and it really becomes a regular part of the conversation, if you will, when we're talking about IT services and organizations. So thank you so much for your insight. Thank you so much for your education. And I'm sure we'll be having another conversation in the future about it.
Cool, great. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Well, thanks again. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Welcome back, everybody, to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops. Today is Tuesday, June 30th, and here's what's coming up in the wonderful world of webinars. We've got some great webinars coming up this week. First one I'd like to highlight for you is one that's happening later on today at 1 p.m. Eastern on Devops.com. It is called The Security Phoenix, a modern approach to DevSecOps focus on people. And it's an interesting presentation that really focuses on DevSecOps, not from the tools approach, but more from a more organization-wide, holistic approach. Francesco Cipollone is he's from NSC 42, and he's going to be the presenter for this particular webinar. It's going to be really, really interesting. I encourage you to take a look at it if you have the time and the opportunity. Again, that one is on Devops.com. The second webinar I'd like to focus on today is happening tomorrow, July 1st on Security Boulevard, and it's called How I Achieved Security Discipline and Governance Across AWS, Azure, and GCP. Jack Roerig, who is the CISO at a company called Turnitin, is going to be the presenter for this event. His company, Turnitin, is a SaaS company that ensures the integrity of global education and research for 34 million students in 150 countries. So that's a whole lot of people. He was having some issues with security governance, closing gaps and reducing its overall attack surface. So this webinar actually focuses on how he was able to achieve all of those goals. Totally worth checking out if you, again, have the time and the ability to do so. That one, again, is happening tomorrow, July 1st at 1 p.m. Eastern, and it is going to be on Security Boulevard. Our final webinar that I want to point out for you is actually happening next Tuesday, July 7th at 1 p.m. This one is on Devops.com. It's called Autonomous Incident and Root Cause Detection. Not the most brilliant title in the world for a webinar, but certainly does drive the point home. Driving down a little bit, it's actually going to be focusing on how machine learning can be used to automate detection, problem detection, and root cause characterization. Nitty gritty, under the fingernail stuff, but again, an important topic and definitely worth checking out. This one is actually sponsored by Zebrium. It's not one to be missed if you are having any issues regarding root cause detection and analysis and wondering how machine learning can really help you along that road. So please do give it a chance. Meanwhile, you can always go look at the webinars that we have upcoming and on demand on both Devops.com and Security Boulevard. We have a ton of webinars in our archive. So hopefully just, kick around. Hopefully there'll be one or two that pique your interest. And please do try to join us for any one or all of these 3 webinars that we have coming up. Until then, we'll talk to you later. Stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up.
Hey, thanks, Charlene, for a great interview there with Bob Hendeman, as well as a webinar preview. Our next segment, of course, after Charlene, we do to Mitch at the Analyst Corner, Mitchell Ashley. And in today's Analyst Corner, Mitchell examines the recent announcements at the Apple Developers Conference around privacy or improvements to their privacy, as well as some of the other announcements that Apple made. Mitchell's passionate about this. Let's now go to Mitch Ashley at the Analyst Corner for what he has to say.
Hi, and welcome to Analyst Corner. Mitch Ashley with Accelerated Strategies Group. A little over a week ago, Apple had their big announcement at their developers conference. Lots of important things, interesting things coming out from that. A lot of attention being paid to Apple moving to its own silicon and away from Intel to really achieve some of the benefits of the innovation that's happened in mobile processors, higher performance, better battery life, things like that. I think it's also just, frankly, a way to get control of their own destiny when it comes to a processor technology, obviously, since they're designing much of that silicon themselves. There are also some other interesting things, I thought, particularly among privacy. And while we can talk about what the individual things that they announced, and I'll mention those in a moment, I think there's a more fundamental shift that's happening and why Apple's making some of the moves and the importance around that. Now, when it comes to privacy, their iOS 14, the next major release of their software, will give users control around some of the privacy that happens that may not have known was going on in the background, things like invisible tracking by applications. Most users don't know that they can track location. If you give them access to your location, they can watch what you do, where you are, what you're doing, tie that to your email address, your phone number, and along with businesses that you're frequenting. So if you go into a store and they have location information, the myriad of apps on your smartphone that have access to your location can use that, whether it's their store or somebody else's, frankly. So that's very interesting. That most people probably don't know that that's happening. By the way, the same thing can happen with Wi-Fi and your presence on the Wi-Fi network and information that's shared about your device. That's a whole nother conversation. But really what they're doing in iOS 14 is giving users control over that invisible tracking by apps so that you can decide whether you want an app to be able to track not just your location, but also that tracking that's happening. It's interesting to see what kind of an eye-opener that will be for many smartphone and iPad users. Also, they're adding the capability to generalize your location. So it might say, I'm in Thornton, Colorado, or I'm in this section of town, rather than giving the real address of where you're at. Because do you always really want to share that? Do you want to share exactly where you're going at every minute, every moment of the day with people you don't know, with applications that are using that information to be able to present ads and other valuable, hopefully, things to you? So those are permissions that you can now grant applications. Again, it'd be interesting to see as end users start to use that kind of thing. Do they see it as a benefit, or they see it as more noise, interference, interruption as applications ask stuff that they may not know what they want to do or how to make that decision? The other privacy-related announcement was around the user interface in iOS 14 and the use of the camera and the microphone. Again, that can be turned on by applications if they have access to it. And once they do, what they do with it, you don't know, and you don't know that they're on. Now, when your location is being used if you're looking at your user interface. And they'll have a similar addition to the new UI in iOS 14, a little dot above the cellular strength signal, 3 bars, 4 bars. They'll indicate whether your camera's on, whether your mic is on by an application that's being used on your mobile phone or iPad. So good to know. By the way, just as a separate note, on the Watch OS 7 that's coming out, they also have a hand washing motion detector and start a timer for you. So time 20 seconds, so you've reached the needed time to properly cleanse your hands and hopefully rid yourself of germs and viruses and things that might have been there. So let's step back for a moment and talk about privacy. Yes, Apple's clearly built a brand and reputation around respecting end users' privacy. And not a surprise to anyone, but we live in this world where we trade our privacy for access to tools, to things like Facebook, for example, just to name one of thousands, where you turn over a lot of information, not even knowing what information necessarily giving to an application or to a company for them to use in whatever ways they deem fit. I mean, we all know about Facebook and the prior election in 2016 and some of that information being used by a third-party company to help campaigns and all that kind of thing. Certainly end users didn't intend that. But I think there's a more fundamental model that Apple is pursuing and could represent kind of a sea change in the implicit trust in the agreement between customer and companies. So what do I mean by this? So rather than exchanging all your privacy for just the use of an application, now Apple certainly has its own apps and privacy around that, but Apple also in some ways asks you to buy into their whole platform strategy, right? Use an iPhone, you got to use iTunes and the App Store to get access to music and applications, right? Don't get to use third-party services for those things, at least not for purchasing. They also integrate across their product line. So you can copy something to the clipboard on a Mac and have that show up to paste on your iPhone. I don't know if you knew you could do that, but there's a lot of integration, and Apple's always pursued this really since the Mac, of this tight integration that can happen, the benefits that come with that to an end user over something that's highly configurable, use multiple things. It's an open platform, but you have to kind of solve all the problems that go with doing that. Now, I think what Apple's doing is an interesting, potentially game-changing model where they're really trying to be the platform that is going to take user privacy, data privacy of their customers extremely seriously, but also implement ways for you to manage and control, really have some say over the destiny of your privacy. There's a mouthful. And they're trading that integrated kind of closed system, if you will, or certainly much more closed than say an Android or other platforms, Linux, et cetera. They're trading on that if you'll buy into our management of your privacy, our ability to give you control over what that is and how you want it to be used, then you'll enjoy a lot of benefits by working across all their platforms, whether it's from laptops and desktop computers that are Macs to their mobile devices, watches, and who knows what else will come next. I think that's the model that they're trading versus you can use my apps if you let me use your information for whatever I want to use. So if successful, then I think there's a good chance that will succeed, because I know I value my privacy. And there have been times in my past where I was not an Apple advocate. They kind of lost me for a while there in the mid-90s, where I thought they'd really kind of broken the trust with their customers, and finally got that on track and started using Apple products again, really in the early 2000s. And I think that's the game changer they're looking for here. If they can trade on giving us access control, management of our privacy, and respecting that in a great deal, I think that's something that will be attractive to more and more of us. Now, tracking COVID and contact tracing and all that kind of thing are something that sort of opens that up to, okay, well, how does that not get abused, and how much am I willing to let that share? So there are some areas where they're kind of pushing new ground in the ways that our private information can be used. But I think in our everyday lives, the apps, the platform, the sharing of data that has been happening already and exposing some of that is a positive thing. Now, could it backfire on Apple that, hey, we didn't know you were doing this? Well, it's not necessarily just them doing it. It's the applications and the companies running on their platform, as well as every other platform, whether it's a web browser or Android or desktop computers for that matter. There's a lot of things happening that most users don't know about and might care about if they really, really knew. So, but it also brings up the kind of Facebook situation, at least for me. So it's a different issue, But Facebook has also taken a lot of heat right now, and I think appropriately so, around their lack of management curtailing antisocial, anti-radical, racial, content, and taking a stand on that. Twitter started to, as it most effective to kind of commentary on what the president's, tweets are appropriate or not. If you're going to do that, probably something a little stronger might help. But, Facebook, who was it? I believe it was Nike, someone, oh no, it was North Face that walked away from Facebook because they aren't taking a stand around racial issues and systemic racism and police brutality. Maybe more companies will do that. You know what? Money talks. Loss of customers get companies to do things. I hate to be cynical about it, but companies rarely do things truly out of their own, kind of giving back to society. There's always something that's driving that about their customers, whether it's expectations or changing views on what companies should be doing, and customers will make a change if you're not willing to do that. So that's kind of what Apple could come under fire about, exposing some of the things that are happening in applications and sharing of your private information. But I don't think it's going to be as big of an issue because it's happening on all platforms by everyone, and they're the first one to take a stand. So that will actually mean a lot. People will give credence to Apple for doing that. If you're, not an Apple person, not a fanboy, whatever, will it make you move or help you move to an Apple platform over something else that you're using today? Possibly, if you care about privacy enough that those kind of controls are appealing to you, it certainly could result in that. But I'm interested to see if this is more of a sea change for the rest of the industry to say, look, you have to take this, seriously. Privacy is something we're not going to be willing to give up so easily as we have in the past, just to get access to Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and whatever other social media applications. People are going to become much more stringent about it, especially once they know what's really happening. At least many users will. Why? I didn't know that was happening. Why do I want that to happen? What are you doing with it? And privacy around COVID and health information too may drive that behavior as well. So keep on the lookout for that. I could be wrong, could be right. Made predictions before, and usually the great thing about predictions, you kind of assume you're going to be wrong, but you want to know that you're directionally correct, and that's oftentimes a success. So I hope I'm at least directionally correct, and if not, we'll make course correction and move from there. But I suspect this is a very likely outcome. Appreciate your thoughts and views. Be sure to reach out. You're welcome to email me at mitchell@accelst.com. That's also our website. If you'd like to visit there for all of our free content, we have some great reports that are just being published around security and vulnerability management. We have some reports I've mentioned in the past around the software delivery management and our ability to create software, and some really interesting, fabulous data that we're pulling from that. And there's more. We'll have some interesting reports around the low-code environment, some of those things. Appreciate that you follow us and read what we produce, watch what we create, and be part of that process with us. So have a good day.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jane Grohl, CEO of the Devops Institute. Some of you may know me. I did some of the segments for TechStrong TV as a lead up to the TechStrong conference, which was awesome. Well, now I'd like to introduce you to my new series known as Jane Explains. The tech space is moving so fast. The terminology, the applications, the environments, the strategies, the frameworks are accelerating faster than ever before. I'm an old IT director. I managed operations and particularly service desk for a very, very long period of time. And just being able to keep pace with things that have been happening over the last, say, 5 or 6 years has just definitely been a quest. And I'd like to bring some of that to you because, again, it's really challenging unless you're staying on top of all of the changes to be able to understand what's happening and more importantly, I think, why. I'm not the most technical person on the block, so I don't think I'll be tackling too many of the programming languages or other deep technologies, but maybe I'll invite a friend or a colleague to join me who can explain that further. So Jane Explains starts in a couple of weeks. If you have topics that you're interested in, please reach out. Happy to do that. And while you're at it, go up to the DevOps Institute website, www.devopsinstitute.com. Become a member. We have some videos up there known as Skill Up Minutes that may also help you set your learning journey on course. So stay tuned. Jane Explains, coming soon.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey Frank, good to see you as always. How you doing?
Good. How you doing, Mike?
I'm good, but I'm a little confused. I feel like I just got sent out of the office, and now this week everybody I talked to is talking about brand new IT solutions to drive everybody back to work. HPE had a big conference this week. They announced no less than 5 different offerings that were designed to track everything from people coming in and out of the building to where they go and who has a temperature and whatever else. And Citrix was also talking this week about some back to the office solutions around some little applets that they have that you can use alongside their virtual networking technology. And all of this comes on the heels of, I guess ServiceNow started this whole conversation. They were out talking about solutions for various vertical industries where they would automate processes on the assumption that everybody is coming back to work. My question to you, sir, is everybody coming back to work or not?
I don't know about everybody, but I think a lot of businesses are going to try to bring people back into the office. Only because of particular management concerns and the comfort level of having a crew on hand. I think it's going to matter a lot based upon the particular vertical markets. Sales organizations, it's not so important if people are meeting their objectives of what they need to do. Customer service type organizations where people deal directly with customers over the phone or whatever, it's not going to be as critical. But any other organization that does analytics or knowledge work or things like that are probably going to look to try and bring people back into an office to try and optimize team building once again.
I think maybe. I also think it matters where your office is. If you're thinking that you want to go down to Park Avenue in New York City and hop on an elevator at 8:30 in the morning with all your closest colleagues jammed in beside you, maybe not. I think that maybe that train ride into the city might not be so much fun either. And it also looks like, to me, at least a third of the country is looking at either pandemic 1.5 or 2.0, depending upon your perspective. It looks like we're not through this thing yet. I wonder if we're being a little over optimistic with these back to work solutions, and maybe it's a little too early.
It might be, I guess, depending upon the part of the country. I mean, if you look at it from, my area in New York, we're, well ahead of the curve at this point in time, and things are moving towards opening up, and the counties that I'm in are moving into phase 3 tomorrow, which means everything from restaurants to regular stores and all that are going to be allowed to have customers come in once again. And if you look at those types of businesses, of course you're going to need staff in-house, and that's where maybe some of HP's solutions fit in pretty well with the checking temperatures and things like that. But you've got other parts of the country that haven't instituted as severe of a lockdown that New York had, and they're starting to climb up the ramp of infections. So yeah, it might be a while, but we're going to just have to see how seriously people continue to take COVID-19.
The other thing that was interesting about listening to HPE talk about its solutions was how much it was all about them delivering it through their services arm. It didn't feel like they were actually promoting their channel partners, unless they think the channel partners are going to be subcontractors to their services arm. But while I agree that there's a lot of good ideas in the HPE solution, there wasn't anything in there that I didn't think a channel partner could copy on their own either. So maybe there's a little tension in the air here as we get into this new post-COVID world.
Yeah, I found that real interesting too, how HPE was kind of talking about this, that, they are the solutions for the end customer. And, realistically, they're going to need channel partners. And I don't think they're going to go out and hire, 10,000 installers or deployers or anything like that. They're going to really need channel partners. And if you look at it this way, from this point of view, a lot of these businesses that'll be using this technology are existing businesses that already have some form of IT support in place, and probably in the mid-market through the channel. So I don't see those folks quickly going to, over to the big nameless giant for their, local services and support when they've, been working with channel partners. So I think HP is going to have to make some concessions to their partners to be successful with this.
All right, we'll keep an eye on what's going on with HPE these days, because more and more they keep talking about their services capabilities, and I'm not quite hearing the word partner as often as I used to. All right, speaking of HPE though, there was a startup this week called Nebulon that launched this really interesting hybrid cloud platform, and I'm not sure it's going to take off, and I'll do my best to describe it, but essentially it's a PCIe card with this new ASIC that they built that plugs into the application server that then connects directly to the SSD drives. And the idea is that you'll be able to use the control plane that they provide in the cloud to run the workload up in either AWS or Google Cloud Platform, and then they'll provide the management of that process. But the data itself will then be stored back again on the local application server inside your data center. And this is a new way of thinking about hybrid clouds. And the benefit is that you don't have to move the data, and you don't have to run afoul of compliance requirements or worry about the security of the cloud service provider. Frank, did you look at this, and what do you think?
I looked at it and I found it interesting that, they are targeting HPE as one of the, server vendors, but they're also talking about anything that has a Supermicro derived motherboard in it as well. So it's going to reach out to more than just HP. What I find interesting about it is that it sort of is like trying to combine, edge computing with the cloud, with internal data storage. And I think there's going to be a lot of confusion on how to properly deploy it, although they claim to be taking on that load with their management capabilities. I haven't seen the product demoed as of yet, and I know about it probably just as much as you from reading the press releases and talking to the company. But there is the potential there to address a couple of issues. One, keeping data on site, and protected in that fashion while the applications run out in the cloud, so you don't have to worry about the loads the applications put on. But I think it could also open up some additional problems, whether it comes down to things with latency or who your cloud service provider is, or even properly protecting the data, because you are giving this application that's based in the cloud access to internal data through this platform. So, unless they've really, crossed their T's and dotted their I's when it comes to keeping everything secure, I would be a little bit concerned about it from that point of view.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. But the definition of hybrid cloud computing seems to continually expand with each passing day. So it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out. Meanwhile, Microsoft turned around and bought CyberX, which I'm sure most of you have never heard of, but they are a specialist in applying machine learning algorithms to secure Internet of Things environments, and I'm sure that Microsoft's looking at this for 5G and whatever else they got going. Interesting thing to me was, I think this company had north of $50 million invested in it, and Microsoft turned around and bought it before it even actually got off the ground too far. What do you think is behind this, Frank?
I think Microsoft is going to make a bigger play into securing industrial IoT. And I think they're going to try and extend a lot of their products to work with more industrial IoT solutions, especially when it comes to the supply chain. So I think when look at it from that point of view, them buying this particular company should provide them with the expertise to properly secure, industrial IoT along with regular IoT. Now, we see IoT exploding everywhere, especially on the consumer side of things, whether it's your intelligent vacuum cleaner or, your other devices or your thermostats. But, that kind of pales in comparison to what industrial IoT might offer to businesses, especially when it comes to the supply chain and manufacturing. And as businesses look to automate more and gather more data, industrial IoT makes a lot more sense. But it also becomes this big sticking point when security is introduced into the equation. So I think Microsoft is potentially making a big play to become, your buddy in the industrial IoT arena that can secure and provide applications to work with your industrial IoT appliances.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, given their history with Windows, they'd have to get a lot of people to have a lot of confidence in their ability in that regard. But stranger things have happened, so we will see.
Well, they are kind of pushing that whole Linux kernel into Windows, so there is that avenue as well.
Yeah, I'm not even sure how many people are going to do that. I remain equally skeptical on both points. All right. CNCF elevates a project called Spiffy, which I'm going to try to do some justice here. But the idea is that everything is a service, whether it is a monolithic service or a microservice, doesn't really matter. And as such, each thing can have its own identity. And so Spiffy provides a way to provide that identity and also do it in a way where that identity can be authenticated in much the same way you would use any kind of multi-factor service. Now, I guess my question to you, Frank, is I feel like we're actually starting to see some progress here in the land of application security, and might things get better sooner than we think?
Potentially. I mean, there's been a lot of focus on things such as web application firewalls and security elements like that, driven by this whole work from home initiative that's gone on because of COVID-19. So I think, both the vendors and businesses themselves are starting to take this whole, service type architecture security a lot more seriously. And, from what we've seen going on out in the real world when it comes to some of the attacks, especially ransomware and things like that, there definitely is a need for that to be improved. And I think this is definitely a step in the right direction. And I think by kind of that classification of thinking of everything as a service, you can add to it that everything is a service that must be secured. And it becomes, I think, an easier concept for people to adopt security around their services.
Yeah, I think this is part of this whole DevSecOps movement. It may take a little while, but it was one of the more interesting technologies I've talked to anybody about lately in that space. And I feel like, it was actually addressing the core problem as opposed to, here, buy another aspirin for your headache and come back for more next week kind of thing. All right. On to security one more time. Rangeforce, company I'm sure none of you have ever heard of, has a new version of their cybersecurity training platform. And the idea is that you can more granularly follow people who are being trained, what their level of expertise is, what skills they need, and you can orchestrate this whole movement a little bit better. And the attacks are based on real life simulations, and it moves past this notion of let's send people into a classroom and we'll give them some training and a certification and hope for the best, or maybe we'll play some tabletop games. We'll actually do some real life simulation. And I could be wrong, Frank, but I feel like cybersecurity training has a long way to go. We talked about this in a show recently where there's tons of jobs out there, but people are applying for them and they're not getting them, and there's a reason for that. So what is wrong with cybersecurity training, and what do we need to do to improve?
Well, Range Force is a very interesting company in how they're approaching this dilemma when it comes down to it. They're kind of leveraging the idea of this hands-on training in these virtual environments that use real-world examples. Now, where they differ from a lot of other folks is that Range Force is making their platform available to, businesses and MSPs and folks like that for not only evaluating potential employees, but monitoring the ongoing training of current employees. So they're taking this from a different angle. Now, when I worked for the federal government, there was certain training requirements that I had to do in the cybersecurity realm. And I had to take, classes all the time and had to, meet these requirements to basically maintain my appropriateness for the position I was in. Out in the regular world, that's a little bit more difficult to do because of, limited budgets for training and things like that. Also, the ability to kind of monitor where somebody is in the training cycle or when somebody needs to learn something new because of a new initiative has always been difficult. Now, Range Force is kind of approaching this as from a point of view of where, the manager, the IT manager or the security manager or whoever is kind of the dean of students almost, where they have this dashboard where they can monitor the progress of their employees taking training. And they can also use this dashboard as a way to say, all right, I'm interested in hiring you. I want you to go through these courses and I want to look at the results of how you went through these courses. And I think it gives us a much better picture of, the capability of a person that you're hiring, and also the, career path for people that are on staff. And I think it's something that's very sorely needed. And I think it's something that really does shift that paradigm of how you train people, how you develop people, and how you even select people. So, I've got a lot of hope for, what they're doing and how important it's going to turn out to be. Now, the big question comes down to how much is it going to cost to use Range Force's, platform to make all this happen. And I think that's something that still has to be worked out a lot.
I think maybe the security vendors will pay for that. They need the end customer to use a lot more features than otherwise they're not going to get the value prop, and then they're going to come back and start ditching on the tools. So I think they have a vested interest in looking at this a lot harder. That said,
but I would want to just throw in one other thing there. If you look at a lot of the security vendors, they get a lot of revenue from their own in-house training, forcing folks to fly to that classroom, pay for training, and pay for certification, and then charge them every year to maintain that. So, there is a revenue stream that a lot of the security vendors have in training. And I think what Range Force is doing might potentially be disruptive to that as well.
All right. To use your metaphor, though, the one thing you don't want to be on is the cybersecurity dean's list, because it ain't a good thing. All right. As always, Frank, enjoyed the chat. Talk to you guys soon, and back to you guys in the studio.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey, Mitchell, thanks very much. Good insight there into what Apple announced and kind of where their head's at regarding privacy and so forth. Guys, that's going to wrap Tuesday, June 30th show. It's our last show for June. We will be back Thursday, July 2nd with fresh content. And we won't be rebroadcasting any new show Friday, though, as we're closed here for the July 4th holiday. So we'll see you all on Thursday. But until then, I hope you've enjoyed the show. Stay safe, stay well, stay strong, TechStrong. This is Alan Schimmel. We're out.